It's so peak, guys. I'm really proud of Nintendo for announcing things the way they have this week, because you have everyone's eyes turning to Nintendo, looking for the new hardware reveal that we're expecting and kind of has to happen within the next 2 months. And what did they do the week where emotions are reaching a fever pitch? They show a launch trailer for East Memoir, Oath and Felghana, and a second trailer for Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. Do you know how many people have been exposed to these games that wouldn't ordinarily pay them any mind? It is exactly what they needed to do. If they market Xenoblade X properly, it will become the best-selling game in the series. So we can only hope they keep this momentum up, especially because the game looks so good. We now have a 3-minute and 38-second trailer, as well as substantial amounts of footage on the Japanese website for the game, which has been compiled and uploaded as one unified 7.5-minute video by the channel Perfectly Nintendo. Now, I think this video is going to be a bit less in-depth than the last one, despite the trailer being longer, because I said so much there that not only does it need to be repeated, but also has been invalidated by a second trailer existing. I'm going to be doing a spoiler section after all of the non-spoiler stuff, so I am going to go through all of the non-spoiler things I possibly can in the trailer, as well as all the stuff from the Japanese website, and then I will be discussing all of the spoilers. Do keep in mind, if you've never played the original game, I will be making tons of comparisons to it, as that is really the best way to analyze anything about a remaster, and a lot of scenes in this trailer are from relatively far into the main story of the original game. I will discuss what chapter they come from and vague generalizations where anyone who has played the game will remember and know what I'm talking about, but I will try not to spoil even the original game story at all in this. The narration over the first minute or so of the trailer is directly taken from the original game. It's from the scene near the end of Chapter 1, where you first go to the Blade Barracks, you meet Nagi, you learn about the Lifehold, about Blade, and their mission. Now, this is edited down a lot more than Lin's lines were in the last trailer, so these are not contiguous lines. All of Nagi's lines in between them are taken out, and some additional explanation and exposition is also not here, but this is all stuff directly from very early on in the original game. Throughout the section, various cutscenes are playing, and you don't need me to tell you that they look great. Not only does this trailer look significantly better than the original Xenoblade X for the Wii U, but it also has a significant improvement over the previous trailer from October. This is not indicative of any new hardware boost. I think we can pretty reasonably assume that all footage from this trailer was either captured on an original Switch or on a dev kit for the original Switch, as they've had over 2 months since that last trailer was done to work on the stuff from this one, and since the game releases in, say, 2.5 months from now, they're probably almost done with it, and final graphical touches are usually one of the last things worked on in new video games, so it makes sense that we're seeing substantial improvements, though some of the motion blur from the original game does appear to be missing, and I think we'll see stuff like that, even higher resolutions and even higher frame rates on the new hardware. This is the bare minimum of what it's going to look like, and it already looks great. The first 30-ish seconds are from the intro of the game, showing the flashback of the Earth being destroyed, the White Whale's trip, and it crashing down on Mira. Again, not much else to say here. There's nothing new being added to these scenes that indicates any connection to the other trilogy of Xenoblade games, though there is a bit more pronounced of a sepia tone over this flashback footage than in the original game. And that's actually because all of this footage is from the cutscene in Chapter 1 Elma's narration comes from, where she and Nagi flash back to the White Whale fleeing in the battle over Earth, and the flashback is shown reusing some footage from the intro with a sepia tone, though because the colors in Definitive Edition are different, having a bit more saturation, a lot more contrast, and just in general being better color graded, if you can call it color grading in a video game, and a lot more vibrant, the sepia tone is also more pronounced, though it is still visible in footage of the original. The second half is from the cutscene that plays when you exit the Starfall Basin for the first time in the prologue. It's the one I reuse so often whenever I talk about Xenoblade X in videos, where the fog clears, you get shots of the open plain of Primordia showing off the scale of Mira and seeing all the indigents running around and stuff. Though in this case, it's cut so that it primarily focuses on Elma talking. There's even a close-up where you can see that even something as important as her model has been improved since the last trailer, as well as showing off NLA. Next is default male cross, or not really, we'll see that later on. Elma and Lyn running together, there's no Tatsu, so this is prior to meeting him, down a road in Primordia, which is just a typical, very stock thing you do at the beginning of the exploration section of a Xenoblade trailer. And then it gets really interesting and I get kind of emotional. There is so much love being poured into this game. Probably even more so than the definitive edition of Xenoblade 1. And that goes down to the people who made the trailers. Because there are a lot of exploration shots in this trailer. That makes sense. A lot of people are being exposed to this who weren't paying attention to new Wii U releases or weren't even playing video games when the original X came out. So you have to expose them to the best part of X. Like, this is the reason Monolith started working on the Zelda series, you know. But these aren't shots that are made from the ground up for this trailer. Many of them, or at least the on-foot ones before it shows off Skell stuff, are recreations of shots from my favorite video game trailer of all time, the exploration trailer for the original Xenoblade X, which released, surprise, surprise, on not the second Thursday, but the second Wednesday of January 2015, 5 days short of a decade ago. And remember, these are completely redone visuals. This was not just something they were able to take from the archives of higher res footage of trailer stuff from the original game. They intentionally recreated specific shots. Now, whether lighting, time of day might be different, but they went back to the same locations they did 10 years ago to hype up a whole new generation of people to Xenoblade X in the exact same way. And that's really special. There must be a lot of passion for the original Xenoblade X project as it was first intended to be, not just the game as was released, because as you'll soon see, almost everything new they're adding to Definitive Edition was present in concept art for the original game in some way. It genuinely seems like this project is Monolith getting to make the version of Xenoblade X they always wanted to, and they're reusing concepts from a decade ago, or at least the ones that didn't get repurposed for Xenoblade 2 and 3, and it's been a decade since then. They're only using the old stuff. Who knows what else they thought of in the last 10 years that could find its way into Xenoblade X2? You might think that, oh, they're using up all their ideas now and this is going to be the last X thing, but no, they're using up only their ideas from the 2015 game now. In addition to the amount of time in between then and now where they could have thought of a whole bunch of other things that didn't make it into Xenoblade 2 and 3, they would also have an entire dev cycle for a brand new ground-up Xenoblade X2 to think of even more cool stuff. It's gonna happen eventually, maybe even in the next generation of hardware. Anyway, first shot is jumping up some rocks next to one of the big lakes in Primordia. I want to say that's Biano, but I might be wrong. And there's a Milesaur there. Classic Xenoblade X thing, big dinosaur that you can fight in Big Robot later, and fight even more effectively on foot later, but we don't talk about that part. They might be buffing Skell combat, we don't know yet. Next is swimming around in Noctilum. I think this is near the Elephant Trunk, the big bridge that connects the small area that connects directly to Primordia and the bigger, more mountainous area, but it might be somewhere else. It's not one of the lakes, I know that much at least. Then back to Primordia, and definitely Biano Lake this time, as this waterfall is the one on the center west area of it, next to the Headwater Cavern. We got more Milesaurs. Dinosaurs are kind of cool. This looks like a replicated shot from the old exploration trailer, but it actually isn't. That one took place on a different waterfall with rocks going across it in the center west of a region. And that was the Everwhelm Falls in Noctilum, looking down on the Qinglong Glade, the area with all the blue grass and flowers and stuff. And not to worry, we will see the glade in DE later. Then we've got the Dorian Cavern in Oblivia. The caverns have those Nopon street lamp things all in them, and just from the ones here, despite it being broad daylight in the middle of a desert, you can tell that the lighting from even that kind of thing is improved. It looks to be acting like a proper light source and not just baked stuff this time, which is neat. It's good to see them use new graphical techniques on their remasters, because this is just what they can do when they're modifying their old work from 10 years ago. Imagine what they'll be able to do from the ground up on the newer version of their engine on more powerful hardware than this. Next, we have another pseudo-recreated shot. This one with a pathway going from upper left to lower right and the party running into the camera in Cauldros. This shot is very close to a lava lake, and you can see more cool lighting from that, as well as being on a finished pathway. You can see Sylvlum in the right-hand corner of the screen, which means we're probably running north-south, so this is the pathway between the Turnion Fork and FN Site 508. In the original trailer, the angle is slightly different and it's during the day, but we're also much higher up and much further north, this being along all the metal pathways between the Forgotten Mining Frigates near the ruined city of Orsim. Then we have a fully recreated shot so you can really directly compare the graphics, because even the time of day is virtually identical this time. Back in Noctilum in the Nopon Braid Bridge area, overlooking that whole little lake by the Jacopotamon and the Qinglong Glade. Very interestingly, they've been avoiding showing us both Noctilum and Sylvlum at night in both of the trailers so far, which leads me to believe there's probably going to be an upcoming third trailer or spot in a Nintendo Direct or something like that, where they go all in and show off the most visually impressive areas of Xenoblade X. Now, is this necessarily going to be part of a tech demo for new graphical capabilities of new hardware? I don't know, but there's a very good chance that whatever that thing is going to be is revealed in between now and when X Definitive Edition releases. Next is another recreation, and one of the most iconic shots from Xenoblade X period, jumping on foot from the floating reef in Oblivia into Lake Basel. Now, just like in the old trailer, this cuts long before hitting the water, but we can see that there's actually some kind of detail in the water surface from the height of the floating reef in Definitive Edition, which, if you remember water surface draw distances from the original, will completely blow your mind. Next, we have our first actual piece of UI, and everyone breathes a collective sigh of relief. Because, hey, look at that. The font is so big and readable. Look at that. It's great. Anyway, this is FN Site 117, one of the first you're likely to encounter because it's in Primordia, close to NLA, and in the direction of early story objectives. So it's not surprising that they show this off here. It's just very good to see UI and see it look this good. The best thing is, and you're going to see this throughout the rest of the trailer, they didn't change the font and aesthetic of the UI all that much compared to, say, what they did between the original and DE of Xenoblade 1. They took the same font and the same graphics and just made them more readable, which is good. It's good to see how much better at graphic design Monolith has gotten in the 2020s, because things were really rough for a while with the original X and 2, just in terms of having UI designers on staff in the first place. Funnily enough, they actually cut in the middle of installing the probe at the FN site here, instead of just using dev tools to make the character mechanical level 5 to be able to instantly unlock it, because we can see the bar starts at 6%, then it goes up to 10%, then it cuts to 90%, goes to 93, 96, and then 100. So it looks like the way field skills operate is similar to how it was in the original game, if not identical. I could see them cutting down on the amount of presses it takes to get through something of a certain level at higher level skills, even prior to getting to level 5 where you can do anything instantly, but that remains to be seen. This is an early game party again because no Tatsu is present, so they almost have to be mechanical level 1 if they didn't mod themselves to be 5 for this shot. We get to see the entire Frontier Nav map, and it looks so clean. Honestly, there is a good chance most of the assets used in this were from the original game. We just never got to see them at higher than the gamepad's resolution. But either way, it looks so much clearer now, and the fact that all of the continents are just connected on one map, you don't need to go through pages to do any sort of thing like that. Most of the segment icons have been completely retooled. The probe one looks mostly the same, but the treasure icon was changed to a treasure chest instead of just a couple sparkles. The tyrant one has been changed to monster fangs with an exclamation point instead of just the head of a Grex. And the skip travel icon actually looks like a fast travel icon instead of just kind of some square that you can't really tell it's a marker on a map being moved from one location to another, especially at gamepad resolution. Monolith has massively stepped up their UI quality in the past 10 years. We then cut to opening a treasure chest on the field in Primordia. Again, it cuts from just starting to open it to when it's almost completed to skip some of the A-mashing. And it appears that the textures have been improved so much you can actually read the words New Los Angeles on the left paper on the container. This is a container from the original game. It's in one of the ancient-looking buildings in the Biano Hills region of Primordia. You can just barely see what I believe is some of the blue crystals from NLA in the upper right-hand corner of this shot, which tracks for where this is relative to the city. We then have running through a cave and can start to see the beginnings of the full proper UI. The first thing to notice is the party list being a lot clearer and not being all the way in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, despite there only being 3 members in the party. The second is that, for the purposes of this trailer at least, the default male avatar's name is Ryan. It is just Ryan. I checked the Japanese trailer, it's still crossed there, so canonically in the English version, at least until they show another trailer with a different name, we have Ryan Xenoblade, who is up there with Clive Final Fantasy when it comes to JRPG protagonists with really funnily mundane names. Most of the elements of the party list have a whole new diagonal theming going to them. The TP bar has been shrunk down, so it's only half the length of the HP bar, as well as starting a little bit to the left because of how the diagonals work, which allows each party member's information to be a bit more readable while also being smaller horizontally. Can you believe that the TP bar was to the right of the HP bar, and there was a very pointless level indicator and class rank indicator to the right of that in the original game? Anyway, said HP bar has also been recolored to a more turquoisey blue. It used to be a dark blue when full health, and turned to a lighter blue after the character had taken damage. There is a different, very conspicuous indicator for when a character is damaged in this game, even though the color doesn't change. We can also see that quest tracking appears to now build off of the formula coined in Xenoblade 2 that was further improved in Definitive Edition and 3. There is an R+X follow ball on command at the bottom of the screen, which suggests that instead of having to press the button multiple times to release a follow ball, it will just be something always in front of you leading you around, somewhat similar to the pathing on the ground in 3. The quest tracker is also pretty much directly out of that game, except instead of there being a story mission and a side quest, it appears that there are 4 different tabs here. As we can see here, the green one is for normal missions or standard side quests. The one being undertaken right now is Proficiency Exam 5, which is one of the several quests you need to complete in order to get your first Skell license. But then the next tab is yellow icon with a hexagon in the middle, and I'm not sure what this could be, as back in Xenoblade 3, green was the color for regular side quests, just like in this game, but yellow was the color for hero quests and side stories, or voiced, character-specific missions, some of which are main story required, which are the equivalent of affinity missions in Xenoblade X. The only thing that makes me unsure if this denotes an affinity mission, though, is Xenoblade 3's main story icon was a red hexagon with an exclamation point in it. So here we have a yellow diamond with a hexagon in it, and that could either be a main story chapter or an affinity mission. Those are mutually exclusive, though, so it is possible that that just stands for both of them, since you can only ever accept one at a time. Upon further review, it does appear that these are unique new icons to make them more readable and more accessible to colorblind people, but the colors are following the same color coding from the original version of the game. So this light green is very similar to the light green used for normal mission quest icons in the original, and the yellow is the same yellow for affinity mission icons. It is very likely then that that will swap out with a red exclamation point if you have a story mission accepted instead of an affinity mission. The color coding does appear to break down after this, though, as there are 2 more important quest types from the original game that are probably represented by the remaining 2 tabs. The third one is purple and has a wing icon, and the fourth one is blue and has an S icon. The remaining quest types are basic missions, purely generic ones that are similar to the generic collect, kill, and those kind of quests from Xenoblade 1, where they're completed as soon as you finish the objectives and don't require you talking to a specific NPC because they're accepted from a quest board and are quests from generic NPCs for the most part. The other type is squad missions, and they're part of the passive multiplayer function that X has, where when you connect to the internet, you're placed in a lobby of a bunch of different players, and you can complete certain tasks, and everyone in the squad will benefit from them. Now, the blue diamond icon has an S in it, and that S was the icon for squad missions in the original game, but their quests log listing was purple, while basic missions was dark blue like this S diamond, so either color coding breaks down or the S stands for basic. The minimap looks like a slightly updated version of the one from the original game, again, higher contrast, using the same color scheme as the original X, but within the UI framework that was used in Xenoblade DE and Xenoblade 3. All of the icons there make sense, and it does seem like we have the same kind of collectible tracking as we did in DE and 3, as we can see 3 normal mission icons just in the cave around the player, when the currently highlighted quest objective is to gather 3 bag flea squashes in Oblivia, and we are in the Devil's Colony, which is a cave in Oblivia, which was one of the best places to find bag flea squashes in the original, and I have no reason to believe that it will be different here. Then they finally begin to flex just a little bit, because we do in fact see Noctilum at nighttime, walking into and discovering the Qinglong Glade, which just kinda seems to be a recurring area in this video for whatever reason. And we can see the new text for discovering an area. Even this is clearer and more readable when that wasn't really an issue in the original games. They're improving things that didn't even need to be improved. We can also see that all 3 party members gain 15 EXP from this, and wow, look at that! If the experience bar pops up only when you actually gain experience, the whole UI is much cleaner and contains a lot less unnecessary information. Who could have guessed? We can also see buff and debuff icons for the first time, as either due to probe or weather effects, all 3 party members have something up 5 and something down 5. We can see that the icons are the same style as the original, and Roman numerals are used to denote the level of the buff and debuff, but instead of buffs just being blue squares and debuffs just being red squares, they are arrow shaped like the buff and debuff icons in Xenoblade 3 were. It's just a lot more subtle than that game, as you can see a slight upward point on the top edge of the buff and the same on the bottom edge of the debuff. The buff icon is very similar to the buff icon for Ether Attack up in the original game, and since the level here is 5, we can assume that this is due to the Energy Mist weather in Noctilum, as its additional effect, barring a Skell fuel recovery, which we can't see anything about because the party does not have Skells in this shot, is potential down 5, which matches the debuff here, even though the icon for that is significantly different. During the segment, Elma begins talking again, and I'm going to be real with you, I couldn't immediately remember what cutscene this was from. I know as a fact it's from the original game. I'm not going to look through every single cutscene to try and find it. Just know that until they start showing off the brand new main story post-game content after the logo for the game appears, all of the dialogue from characters that were in the original game is from the original game and not new. The next shot is panning around the Biano Lake area of Primordia once again. I know I've seen this shot before. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's from a cutscene or it's from the montage of panning and tracking shots around Mira that plays over the title screen if you leave the game idle on it for long enough. I think it's the latter because the small birds are flying around, but none of the things like blade camps, enemies, or treasures or any of that's loaded in, which is consistent with the title screen shots and not cutscenes, which usually don't even have that environmental stuff. Then we get the definitive edition version of another extremely iconic scene, the one that plays when you get the Skell license and depicts your character walking through a hangar in NLA and getting in their Skell for the first time. This is a very cool scene, but also important for historical reasons, as the E3 2013 trailer for the original Xenoblade X very heavily focused on this specific cutscene, showing off that pilotable mechs were back in a Xeno game. Considering the fact that the song playing is the game's title theme Mono X, and this scene is lined up with something after the signature Sawano drop, I think hype is really the best word to describe it. Almost every texture looks better, the lighting looks better, the way the materials on the Skell look are better, and we got Nagi dialogue over it. It's great. It is peak. What else can I say? It's even followed up with a shot of Skells flying in formation over the ocean from very close to the end of the game, which, honestly, compared to how they snuck in shots from basically the end game into trailers for the original X, I much prefer this to them directly spoiling one of the biggest reveals in the UK launch trailer. Which, by the way, was one of the late game plot twists that I hadn't already had spoiled for me by a YouTube comment in like June, a couple months after the Japanese release of the original, but half a year before the international one. Then we get some more exploration shots, this time in a Skell. First, we're flying around, say it with me, the Biano Lake region of Primordia, then showcasing an often forgotten area, honestly, as we drop down in pure freefall into the cavernous abyss in Sylvalum, and then something that will make longtime players extremely happy. This orange Skell, clearly with the flight module installed, jumps and then lands back down on top of a cliff in Primordia with no flight module activation. It seems like they fixed another one of the really big quality of life issues people had with the original. You could not just jump around in a Skell once you had the flight module installed. It would kick in automatically and you'd start flying at a low height, even if all you wanted to do was just get somewhere you could have by jumping without the flight module in the first place. This also meant that the area theme of wherever you are would be interrupted by the first couple notes of the flight theme pretty much no matter what you did. So this will fix not only the music, but also the exploration. We don't really see any transition directly into flight in any of the footage, but I think we can pretty reasonably assume that double pressing the jump button is how you activate the flight module now, and everything else control-wise is the same as it was in the 2015 release. We've then got some driving around in the lava lakes in Cauldros, as well as yet another glimpse of the Qinglong Glade region, this time from the air as a trio of Skells fly in a northwesterly direction, while the camera points more southeast. And then, well, we're gonna be here for a while because it is combat time, and they dumped us straight into a clip of Overdrive, so we have basically everything to talk about here. First off, we're fighting a level 39 Bronze Senicula somewhere in Primordia. The party is in the low 40s, and now has a fourth member, this being our first glimpse of Arena in this game. We can also see what the HP bars look like when they're partially empty. The bar empties into a translucent gray, and there's a large white line on the edge of the blue segment as long as the character's HP isn't full, so there is still a very easy way to check at a glance if someone's HP is topped off or not. The TP bar is now a darker blue instead of the green it was in the original game, and the number is smaller than the HP number while also still being bigger and more easy to read than it was in the original when they were the same size. Lyn and Arena are both inflicted with a debuff, and I'm going to assume based on the icon that it is Ether Resistance down 3, which does track for what the Bronze Senicula could do. Overall, the enemy targeting UI appears to be, again, very heavily inspired by the route taken in Xenoblade 3. There's a new icon next to the enemy level that denotes what type of enemy it is, as that's important for several abilities and augments. Arts are now below the enemy's HP bar, which is once again fixed at the top of the screen, and here, the player is targeting the Senicula's body but not locked onto it, as the icon is a circle and not a changed reticle. We will see what the targeting a body part looks like in a minute, though importantly, it actually shows what body part we're targeting. There are names for it, so you can tell more easily what you need to break. Say you're looking up an item that drops, and it drops specifically from X enemy's X body part, now you know exactly what to break. And it's possible the bestiary might even more granularly list what drops from each enemy in such a way. In the original game, the targeted enemy's HP bar was always in the top middle of the screen, but then there was a smaller bar over their model. Here, in this case, instead of just being on the center of the enemy, the second smaller bar is actually tied to the body part that you are targeting, which makes it a bit more readable. More importantly though, the enemy art indicator has been enlarged and moved to underneath the big HP bar on top, instead of next to the small HP bar. Ordinarily, that art dialogue was really, really small, and sometimes it was hard to even make out what type of art they were using. When here, it's really big and clear, about the same size as it is in all of the other Switch games, and you can very clearly see that it's using Ether Shot. And now obviously the Ether Shot art is Ether Element, but there's still an Ether icon anyway, and it's going to be a lot more useful for other arts, because, hey, maybe you died to a tyrant that used a lot of one specific element, and now you know to resist that element. That sort of thing. Damage numbers look largely the same as the other Switch games, where incoming damage is red, outgoing damage is white, and critical hits are in a starburst icon. Now we can talk about arts. Similar to Xenoblade 1 DE, the art icons themselves are largely unchanged, it's just the UI styling around them that's different. From left to right, the arts the player has equipped are Burst Grenade, Flame Grenade, Rising Blade, Tornado Blade, Assault Hammer, Offensive Stance, Burning Slash, and Power Dive, suggesting that this player, at level 42, has made it 8 ranks into the Samurai Gunner class, which is completely believable based on progression in the original game, so it's likely numbers related to that sort of thing have been kept at least mostly the same. The clip starts with the player having just activated Rising Blade, and we can see fading out a blue exclamation point in the upper left-hand corner of the art icon. This is something originating from Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition, where if you are fulfilling the conditional requirements for an art that has them, an exclamation point will show up, letting you know that you've met those conditions without needing to double check things. The funny thing about this is, yeah, Rising Blade is absolutely fulfilling its condition for additional damage here, but the description on the arts palette has actually been fixed in DE when it was incorrect in the original. I don't know if this was a localization typo or a typo in Japanese that was translated accurately but incorrectly to how it actually works, but in the original game, Rising Blade's description said deals weapon damage plus when taunted increases damage. Taunt is an actual status in Xenoblade X that does what it usually does in MMOs and other similar games to this, but Rising Blade's actual effect, and this is consistent in the arts menu when you go in to level up your arts, was actually to boost damage when targeted, not when you are taunted by the enemy or you are taunting the enemy. And this is fixed in DE where it does simply read when targeted. So this is good because they're not just copying and pasting all of the text from the original for things that are unchanged, they're going over and doing an additional editing pass of all that old content, which can only mean higher quality for the total product. 3 of the arts, Tornado Blade, Assault Hammer, and Burning Slash, have small gray circles next to them, and these appear to be inspired by Xenoblade 3's depiction of additional effects for arts. These, in 3, arts that did AoE damage or placed a field had an icon in the lower right corner, and the upper right corner was used for reactions in the break, topple, etc. combo chain. This appears to be consistent here, as Tornado Blade has the exact same AoE icon in its lower right corner, and Tornado Blade always did AoE around the user. Assault Hammer has what's obviously a topple icon in its upper right corner, it always inflicted topple, and Burning Slash, which does AoE in front of the user, has a new icon, an upward arrow one, which is probably a new icon for AoE in front. So instead of just using the same AoE icon for every type of AoE, they're now using distinct ones for each kind, which is just more quality of life, being able to tell exactly what your arts do at a glance. Interestingly though, Burst Grenade, which does AoE surrounding the target, does not have an icon denoting any of that kind of thing. So either that kind of AoE doesn't have an icon, or this Bronze Senicula is the only enemy targeted, so that AoE icon doesn't show up, which doesn't make sense because the other AoE icons do show up. But maybe you can use those AoEs to accidentally target a new enemy so they're warning you, and the Senicula is so big Burst Grenade wouldn't hit any other enemies near it because the radius is smaller than its body. I don't know. We can also see what the colors look like for secondary and tertiary cooldowns. The 2 yellow arts, Burning Slash and Power Dives, the 4 outside arts, all have their tertiary cooldown filled, and the 3 orange arts, all the melee damage ones, have all just been used so their primary cooldowns are still off. But Offensive Stance, the blue one, has its secondary filled and is working on its tertiary, so we can see that instead of being green like in the original game, secondary cooldowns are orange, while tertiaries are still white. We can also see something very interesting, and that is the arts aren't just circles, they have frames around them. The 4 longsword arts, Rising Blade, Tornado Blade, Offensive Stance, and Burning Slash, have triangular spikes on the upper right and lower left corners, while the assault rifle arts, Burst Grenade, Flame Grenade, Assault Hammer, and Power Dive, have squared off nubs on the 4 cardinals of those frames. This is a small indicator to remember quickly which art comes from which weapon, just for the purposes of knowing weapon damage type things, and for managing your secondary and tertiary cooldowns better. Because remember, the secondary and tertiaries only are active for the weapon you have out currently. We can even see that switching weapons is still done with the X button, and that there's a little longsword icon that also has the spikes on it. And we will see later when a ranged weapon is equipped, it has the squared nubs. There is also the name of the weapon there. That kind of was one of my least favorite UI elements in the original game because it was very superfluous. You don't really need to know the name of the weapon you're actively using because you can only equip one melee weapon and one ranged weapon, which means pressing the X button only switches you between the two. You only need to know which weapon you currently have equipped in terms of it being melee or ranged. You don't need the full name, but we'll see in other clips that this does seem to be something you can turn off. More importantly though, the indicator of where you are relative to the enemy positional wise is still done in text. It says front, and the player is obviously in front of the bronze Sinicula, as opposed to being an arrow-based indicator like it was in Xenoblade 3. Honestly, I preferred the texts to the arrow. I was always forgetting whether up or down meant front or back, and side was the only one I could very easily remember using the arrow, so I'm okay with having to read a word instead of just looking at an icon for this. The indicator for your party's morale level has been moved to the lower left of the arts palette. We can see one of the 3 segments is filled up there, and it looks like that and the Y button gauge to the right actually fill up from the inside moving out, so this fills right to left as opposed to left to right, like basically every other gauge in the game does. Alright, I danced around it long enough, we need to discuss the overdrive here. The good news is it appears to work exactly like it always did, but it's still the overdrive from Xenoblade X, so I'm going to try to keep the explanation as simple as possible. First off, we can see that Ryan's portrait has a little gear icon to the lower left of it, indicating that he is in overdrive, and since none of the other party members have that icon, it seems like they are not in it. This is very useful. It was extremely hard to tell which of your party members, be they human or AI, were in overdrive, so this makes it a lot easier to coordinate if you're playing multiplayer without using voice comms, or even just checking at a glance whether or not your party members are entering overdrive in response to you doing so as well. We can also see something incredibly useful, an entire combo list on the upper right-hand corner. This is already a much more useful version of the blade combo list that shows up if you start one of those in Xenoblade 2, as it indicates literally every single way to manipulate the overdrive counter and do specific things with it. Overdrive counter guidance just shows that consecutive ranged and consecutive melee arts increment the counter, and that in order to switch between the two of them, you have to go through a blue, purple, or green one. Color combo guidance also lists every combo of colors that has an additional effect beyond just incrementing the counter, like doubling the count, increasing appendage damage, and all that stuff. The only thing that concerns me about this guide, unless they are changing how overdrive works, is that the exact same rainbow icon is used for any combination of 2 or more colors. And this icon is a combination of blue, purple, and yellow, regardless of what colors it is actually representing. In the counter guidance tab, they represent changing between orange and yellow without losing your counter combo as going from rainbow into either green, purple, or blue into rainbow, when it should be yellow/orange into one of those 3 into orange/yellow. Under color combo guidance, double overdrive count is listed as green into blue, purple, or yellow, when it should be green into all 5 colors. And appendage damage up is listed as purple into blue, purple, or yellow, when it should be purple into only orange or yellow. So I would prefer if they made bespoke color icons for all of those subsets of colors instead of using the same generic rainbow one for everything. But either way, this is a guide showing every possible Overdrive outcome in a very simple, easy to read manner that you can even turn off with the minus button if you've memorized everything or need to see that corner of the screen. On top of the color combinations, using any blue, green, or purple art will grant you additional bonuses regardless of what other colors of art you use it in relation to. Every blue art will increase your Overdrive timer by 0.1 seconds times the number on the counter. Every green art will do the same, except it's 0.05 seconds per party member affected by the green art times the counter, and every purple art will give you 10 TP times the Overdrive counter per hit inflicted. And hey, guess what? You can see one art of each of those three colors on the arts palette, and in the lower left corner, so not conflicting with any of the Xenoblade 3 derived icons on the right side, there are little Overdrive colored icons that act as reminders for that. Offensive stance, the blue art, has a clock with 2 arrows next to it. Burning Slash, the purple art, has a TP icon. And Power Dive, the green art, has a clock with 1 arrow, showing exactly what those do, so you can remember that sort of thing as well. This is all so much more helpful, and I think will lower the barrier to entry of using Overdrive properly a whole lot. We can also see pop-ups on the right side of the screen underneath the guide every time an Overdrive bonus is triggered. It looks like the player so far has just been spamming the 3 melee arts they know, because the EXP bonus, which is gained in increments of 10% by using 3 melee arts in a row, is already at 60, so they're at 18 melee arts used, only 25 hits on the counter, so they probably haven't been using a lot of Tornado Blade, and well, the timer is closing in on 5 seconds left. So it looks like they haven't done a whole lot to extend it. I couldn't tell you what levels any of the 3 melee arts are at, or how the cooldowns relate to what they are at a given level. I couldn't tell you if they have an Extend Overdrive augment equipped to increase the base 15-second duration, but hey, that's a thing they can do. There is a clip in the compilation video from the website that we may or may not talk about later that shows entering into Overdrive, and it starts at just shy of 25 seconds, but just from that, it's impossible to tell if the new base time for Overdrive has been extended from 15 to 25, or if the person just had Overdrive extension gear and augments equipped. Throughout this clip, all they use is Rising Blade into Tornado Blade, which is something you'll be using a lot if you're using Overdrive with Longsword, though you will notice that Tornado Blade is only 2/3 recharged when it gets used. And that is where the brand new UI element, the green segmented meter to the lower right of the center of the arts palette, comes in. This is a brand new mechanic, as the Y button's only effect in combat in the original game was getting in or out of your Skell, and it appears to be a new resource you can generate that allows you to instantly use arts. Nintendo of Japan posted a blog article a few hours after the trailer first dropped that expands a little bit on some new features and story elements. The first thing it talks about is stuff related to the follow ball and quest tracking, which I already was able to completely glean from before, but it also sheds a little bit of light on this new meter. Using just basic Google translation, under the header "New features to help you in battle." During exploration, you may encounter battles with primitive creatures. This title adds a quick recast feature that shortens the waiting time for arts. By using this feature, you can broaden the scope of battles, such as making it easier to respond to calls from allies. I understand why soul voice calls are the thing this article focuses on, because it's a major feel-bad in the original game when an ally calls for an art of a specific color, and you just used your only art of that color, so it's completely on cooldown and there's no way you're going to be able to respond to it. Using this new meter will allow you to do so. It will just cost whatever this new resource is. The meter isn't completely full here, but it looks like it has 6 or 7 segments in it, and it looks like the amount of gauge consumed is proportional to the amount the art has already recharged when you use this quick recast on it. And that's because compensating for 1/3 missing charge on Tornado Blade here appears to only cost about 1/3 of a segment per gauge. We don't know how you build up this meter, but this early on into the battle, the player has almost 5 segments already. So I really hope this either strongly decreases the effectiveness of arts you use this way, or art damage in general is scaled around being able to cheat arts out like this, or it's just a resource that's very hard to generate, harder even than like TP without an infinite overdrive build, and can be kept between battles, which is why it's this high already, because it had been built up out of battle. This then would be a good comeback mechanic or balancing mechanic for people who are struggling. They can just go out, max out their TP and this recast meter, and then come into a hard boss fight with all the possible advantages, because anything else would completely break the game. Now I know you can just never press the Y button and have the exact same challenge as the original game did, but it will be very tempting, and unlike the weapon names, which it has been confirmed you can turn off, I'm not sure if you can turn this specific meter off. There are plenty of shots of battle gameplay in this trailer and other footage that do not have this meter present, but we don't have enough information about it yet to tell if it has been manually turned off in the settings or just hasn't been unlocked yet and it's gated behind some sort of story or side quest progression. Are you ready to discuss even more UI? Because the next clip is fighting what I think is a fairly iconic tyrant, Asana the Azure Star, in Sylvalum. This time in Skells. So we have all of that UI to talk about now. We cannot tell who's in the party here because when someone gets in a Skell, their portrait is replaced with that Skell's head, and the name also changes to the name of the Skell frame. The first thing here is to look at the names and numbers of the Skell frames. I promise this is interesting. The first thing to note is the one on the bottom, the AD0350 Wells ST, because that is a name that is not present in the original game. However, this is a Skell that's present in the original game. This Skell frame is called the Uerusu in Japanese, and the localization of the original Xenoblade X chose to Romanize that as Verus, or Virus. However, what they didn't realize when making this choice is that it is actually a reference to something called Wells in Xenogears, which is written the same in katakana and spelled WELS in the localization of that game. So now, in the English version of the game, the intended romanization is used to properly maintain the reference. This is a good sign because while I don't expect them to change everything, obviously Skells are still Skells and not dolls, it seems like they are willing to go back and correct localization mistakes that wouldn't require re-recording too many lines or that sort of thing. I'm not quite sure we're gonna get Blue Bloods and Beyond the Logos Artificial Destiny Emancipator back, but hey, they are willing to change things, which is always good. I was confused about the letters at the beginning of every Skell frame name for the longest time, until I realized that they're actually very simple. In the original game, Urbans begin with US, Formula, Wells, Lila, and Inferno begin with AS, and Mastema and Amdusias begin with XS. However, here you can see Urban is UD, Lila and Wells are AD, and Mastema is XD. I thought that this meant that the D class was some new type of Skell frame, but then I just checked the Japanese name for these things, and Japanese used Ds in the original game. And the change is because the mechs are called dolls in the Japanese version and Skells internationally. So basically every other language used S in the original, but it looks like either localizing the new Japanese text from the ground up as opposed to using the original localization for the original game as a basis and just haven't gotten around to changing the Ds to S's yet, or the new localizers for Definitive Edition saw that there was a discrepancy, thought it was a pointless change that they did for no reason in the original, without making the connection that it was changing doll to Skell, and are reverting it, even though, honestly, I think this should stay as S. Like, yes, the D is more faithful to the original Japanese version, but the change was made to be consistent with a change that was made everywhere else in the game, and everywhere else in the game is also going to be consistent with Skell. So changing this back to doll kind of doesn't make sense. Anyway, now that we know that The Ds here are equivalent to an original Japanese D, which is equivalent to an original international S. I can confirm that yes, these are just the same level 50 Urban, Lila, Mastema, and Wells frames from the original game, so it's likely those are basically going to be the same with no changes. As an aside, through the process of figuring this out, I'm pretty sure I cracked the code for what all the letters and numbers in the Skell names mean. We're going to start with the 4-digit number for each of them, and actually the last 2 digits first. Those are the easiest by far. The last 2 digits of the number are just the level you need to be in order to pilot that specific frame. All 7 main frame types have a level 30 and a level 50 version, and those all end in 30 and 50. Additionally, the Skell you get with the Skell license is a unique level 20 version of the Urban, that ends in 20, and in the mission where you do some testing to finally unlock the Skell flight module, you get a unique level 15 formula that ends in 15. The first 2 digits basically just appear to be production codes, as in, they are the order in which each frame type was designed. The formula is the 0100 series, and that appears to be the default Skell blades use, so it makes sense as the one that was first developed. The next one is the Urban, the 0200 series, which is another light Skell type, and then the Wells, Lila, Inferno, Mastema, Amdusias in that order. 1, 2, and 3, Formula, Urban, and Wells are all considered light frames. 4 and 5, Lila and Inferno are considered medium frames, and 6 and 7, Mastema and Amdusias are considered heavy frames. So it kind of makes sense that they start out with a light, fast, generic one that any blade can use, and then gradually, as they got better at making Skell technology, were able to fit more and more heavy weapons and armor on them. Then, before the 4-digit number, there are 2 letters, the second of which is always S or D depending on which version of the game, and I'm going to be using D because, as far as we can tell, that's what's being used in the official English of Definitive Edition. Formula, Wells, Lila, and Inferno are all AD, Mastema and Amdusias are all XD, and Urban is the lone UD class. This means that despite the only 2 heavies being the only 2 XDs, these do not just stand for light, medium, or heavy. My guess is that AD stands for either Attack Doll or Assault Doll. Again, just because the formula is in AD, and it really is just the default Grunt Blade combat Skell, so it kind of makes sense for the Assault or Attack class of Skell to have 2 lighter and faster models, and 2 heavier but not super heavy duty hard to move ones that can carry more weapons and armor. Despite what I said before, I am pretty sure that the X does indicate a heavy type Skell, and while you might think it means experimental, that's not true, and I'll explain why later. Funnily enough, I am actually pretty sure that the X stands for extreme, and that's because the heavy type Skells are able to wear much heavier armor and have much higher fuel capacity than even a medium, which means they're the best at doing heavy duty stuff. So they can handle very powerful, high fuel cost weapons better than any other type. They're also the least mobile and evasive in the air and cost the most fuel to fly, so saying that these are more niche, conditional use models that aren't fielded in large quantities at a time and are best suited for extreme situations where the weapons and armor of a normal assault doll will not be useful does make perfect sense. Lastly, we have the UD, as represented only by the Urban, with an asterisk. And I do think this stands for Urban Doll. And that's because, well, the only model Blade uses of the UD is the Urban, and the Urban was the first UD to be developed, so it kind of makes sense that Project Exodus, which was all about getting humanity away from Earth and protecting the ships that carry cities until they can find a new planet, would make the first kind of Skells they develop first a generic combat Skell, and then an urban combat Skell, say ones to escort the outside of ships to defend them from there, and then ones to defend the cities on the inside that are better suited for urban combat. And the thing about that is, there are other UD models that are not Blade issue. 4 of X's optional party members were DLC in the original Japanese version of the game. They were included on disc in the international version, just kind of as an I'm sorry you had to wait this long for the localization, and they are going to be included on the cartridge in all versions of Definitive Edition. Completing the final affinity mission for each of these characters gave you a recipe for a new craftable piece of something that's useful in combat. Yelv gives you a brand new type of ranged weapon, so we're not talking about that here, but the other three actually give you new Skell frames, and all of them are UD. HB's gives you the UD0232 Police, which gameplay-wise is more or less a power-crept version of the level 30 regular urban frame, but in universe is presumably a non-military grade version of that same urban, designed specifically for use by NLA's police. And well, the only people who leave the city, the urban area of New Los Angeles, are going to be the Blades, who I'm going to assume, as military people, are not under the jurisdiction of the NLA's regular non-military police, so it makes sense that the police use urban Skells. The other two characters then give you a brand new frame type, as Bose gives you the UD0830 Dozer, and Alexa gives you the UD0860 Excavator. The Dozer we can just straight up see in civilian use around NLA in cutscenes and just gameplay in the original game, and the Excavator appears to be Alexa's souped up combat version of it, hence why it's level 60, which outclasses any other type of frame besides what I'm going to assume are specific custom versions of the basic 7. So yeah, the Urban Combat Skell is the 0200 series, and that's UD, and then there is also a 0800 series, which appears to have been developed from the ground up for civilian city construction use, hence why it would also be an Urban Doll. Lastly, we have the two letters at the end of each name, and you might think this doesn't really mean anything because all the ones in this clip, and every single one you can get in the actual original game, are ST. That's not actually true. Remember the level 15 version of the formula that's used for testing out the Skell module? Well, that is actually an XT formula. Its full name is the AS or AD 0115 Formula XT. So that is where X means experimental. This one-of-a-kind formula model used by the outfitters specifically to test the flight module is an experimental type, but all of the frames you can just buy normally are standard type, or ST. These are all standard issue ones that any Blade that wants one and has the resources and money to get one can have one. That being said, we are allowed to pilot custom Skells, and that's because there are level 60 versions of the main 7 Skell frame types, and those are only unlocked after beating the game, and instead of just being buyable, have special recipes that you need to bring a bunch of different items to get. And those all have unique names. The Urban Lincoln, Formula Zero, Wells Kane, which goes kind of crazy hard as a double Xenogears reference now that I think about it, Lila Queen, Inferno Skydon, Mastema White Reaper, and Amdusius Hades. And these appear to be custom versions of that frame made specifically for your party members, as while they do still have the base name of the frame, they don't have any of the other numbers or letters indicating they're not a mass production version of that frame, as well as having a unique name. So it's likely that these are customized versions of the level 50 frame to suit the ace pilots that your party members become by the time you beat the game. And then of course on top of that are the Ares 70 and Ares 90, which I'm guessing are completely unique, one-of-a-kind, experimental kinds of Skells that are supposed to represent the theoretical performance of a level 70 and level 90 frame, though obviously a properly kitted out level 60 from one of the main 7 can outdo a 90 and on foot is going to clear Skell no matter what. Basically, the Ares are the Gundams, and everything else is a progressively being iterated on mass production model that some characters can customize to make a unique, more powerful version of that. Anyway, let's talk about the rest of the Skell UI. Even in the original game, Skells accumulated GP or gear points instead of TP or tension points, but in Definitive Edition, we can see that GP is actually purple colored instead of being the same color as TP like in the original. Next to each of the 4 Skell portraits, we can see a generic icon of a Skell frame, as well as one of a gasoline canister. Any party member who had a Skell assigned to them would have a similar icon to this one above their TP-GP bar, and any party member whose Skell has been destroyed would then get that icon X'd out. In this case, we can see that all 4 party members have a Skell assigned to them, because they're all on their Skells right now, and none of them have had their Skells destroyed, because they're all on their Skells right now. In the original game, there was a proper bespoke fuel bar for every single party member to the left of their portrait, but here, everyone has this generic gas canister, and this icon does actually remain the same in all Skell footage we've seen so far, and there is additional footage of a Skell with like just over 50% of its fuel left, and the icon is still this one, so the black bar at the top of the rectangular part doesn't like get wider and the level decreases when fuel goes down. I am guessing that blue is just the Skell has a decent amount of fuel in it, then it changes color at like 50%, 25%, and 10% or something like that. So they replaced a full bar with an at-a-glance indicator, and I'm sure you can go into a menu and see everyone's actual fuel level. The urban depicted here only has 5 arts on it right now. The one highlighted is Strike Launcher, which works exactly how it did in the original game, right down to getting the new enemies in front AoE icon, because that's what it did in the original game, and it does have the exclamation point for with morale boosts damage. So yeah, morale level 1 is enough to get that bonus effect. The other arts equipped are some kind of ranged multi-missile thing, some kind of ranged burst shot thing, and some kind of shield, as well as one red with an up arrow and a dotted circle, something that also has a conditional bonus. I am going to be real with you, I do not know why this art cannot be used right now. At first I thought it was just a melee ranged art that, okay, you were out of range for, and they have a very, very obvious indicator to show move forward and you can use this thing, but the icon underneath the red does appear to be from the needle gun, which was a ranged thing, and it did have a conditional damage boost when you are being targeted, and, well, Asana is using an AoE attack, so I can't tell for sure if it is directly aggroed to the main player, but it could be. I'm not sure what's up with that. It is what it is, I guess. Additional things to note, the weapon name is not present there, and this does not necessarily mean there's no auto attack weapon equipped, as there is other footage of a player fighting on foot with no weapon name being displayed. And you can't just not have an on-foot weapon, plus we can see auto attacks going out when there's no weapon name, so this is just something you can turn off. We can also see that the instant recast meter is not present, though again, there is other Skell footage where it is there, so either it has not been unlocked yet, or it has been turned off. We can also see that, despite there not being a full box for a targeted enemy anymore, the unique little flourishes on the sides of the box to denote a tyrant are still present, and the design there is very similar to how it was in the original game, though not identical. We can also see that the player is locked onto the horn body part, as noted by the completely different changing reticle that very obviously looks like it's locked on when compared to the one from the other clip with the Sinicula, so we can tell that this is the locked on and the other one isn't, but also the fact that there is a yellow HP bar underneath the small HP bar for the enemy. Appendages have visible HP bars now, so you can tell how and if you're going to break them. That is major quality of life, and I cannot be happier they decided to add this. Back to non-gameplay stuff, the next shot is brand new. It depicts a new white Skell with cool shoulder things, some energy core looking things that glow blue but appear very similar to Ouroboros cores from Xenoblade 3, and a giant katana on its back, fleeing from birds in Sylvalum. It does a side flip and then cuts into the cockpit where we can see what appears to be a woman in a brand new piloting suit, so this is probably going to be a new set of gear that didn't exist in the original game but we will get access to in Definitive Edition. We also see a glimpse of the pilot outside the Skell, and unfortunately are not able to determine anything really about their character, as they're wearing this evil Emil Near mask. So that's neat, we've got a new masked character. They do appear to be a member of Blade though, as there is a thing on their chest that just says Blade in it, so this is presumably going to be an ally, and as you will see in the very next shot, this model of Skell is actually controllable by the player in gameplay. So this is going to be a brand new Skell frame type, and it seems likely that this is going to be a new optional party member that works the same way as the DLC characters for the original Japanese release did, where you can get them into your party, and then by finishing their last mission, you get a new Skell frame. It just happens to be this new design. The voice lines playing over this section do also sound like something a new party member would say at the end of their first Affinity mission, basically confirming that, yeah, you can call on me and add me to your party in the future if you'd like. These lines are also brand new and are said by what appears to be a very conspicuous Erica Lindbeck in the English version, who is famous for many things, including not being in the original Xenoblade X at all. This, as such, is almost certainly a brand new character who is a member of Blade. And you might be wondering why I'm talking about brand new story-looking content in the non-spoiler section of the video. Well, that's because there's no main story spoiler context for this. None of the other main characters are in any of the cutscenes with this. We don't even see Cross in any of the cutscenes here. For all intents and purposes, this appears to be a new optional recruitable character who you can get during the main story and is just another quirky member of Blade you can add to your party at your leisure, who comes with affinity missions and maybe a new Skell frame as a reward. There's nothing to indicate that anything regarding this character is post-game content, so I'm going to assume they are also adding additional content to the story sections that were in the original game, and as you will see in the spoiler section of this video, the new story content does seem to just be continuing from the ending of the main game and not an entire separate campaign like all of the other ones were. This new Skell bears many similarities to the Ares designs, including the Ouroboros-looking cores, which were present on concept art for the Ares from the original game, as well as in a close-up of an Ares model we'll see later on in the trailer in the spoiler section. And I was going to tell you to start calling this the Zeta Ares in this video because its flight mode is extremely cool and has it turning into a jet, but the Nintendo JP article kind of stopped me in my tracks after a couple hours because there is a very small section on this Skell. The only new visual material it comes with is this new, very cool looking render, and everything else I said mentioning the article is redundant now that I'm editing this, because Nintendo of America also tweeted out this render and confirmed that this Skell's official English name is the Hresvelg, a reference to the big windbird guy from Norse mythology, which fits very well in all of the various world mythological references that are frequently used in other Skell frame names. And just for you guys, because I know someone in the comments is going to make this joke if I don't, the reality of free choice. On the left side, Xenoblade X is canon. On the right side, Xenosaga is canon. The truth, another 5 years of Three Houses discourse for some reason. Yippee! It has the same name as Edelgard's last name. Here, though, is where I pull the rug out from under you, as Hresvelgr is not a brand new model. This design has existed since the original Wii U version of the game. It just didn't make it into that game. In fact, almost all of the brand new content you will see in all of the media we will be discussing today is from concept art for the original Xenoblade X. They are just using ideas they had but weren't able to implement into the original game. Very little of the new content from DE is going to have been created from the ground up for DE. In fact, it seems like almost everything from the top secret unidentified material section of the Xenoblade X art book is making it into Definitive Edition. So, honestly, the pilot of this Skell is the real outlier here. That being said, though, there are two characters from this concept art section who do not appear elsewhere in the trailer, who could be the identity of that pilot underneath the mask. The first is a name you've definitely heard before, Reina Sakuraba, who, back before the creation of the Avatar character, is likely to have been the main heroine of the game. Her name suggests that she's connected to the Sakuraba Industries arms manufacturer, but this character didn't exist in the original game, so we can't know for sure, and even the art book plays a little coy with it. Obviously, the heiress to the big arms manufacturer that developed all of the first Earth Skells would make sense to be a pilot, and would also probably have to hide her identity to go out on Blade missions. The other character is one you might not have heard of before, Emily. she has only one piece of full-body concept art, and is described as the president's daughter. And also, speaking of the president, Maurice Chosan was a presidential aide and former defense minister, so he might have connections to her. Now, obviously, Chosan, as far as we can tell, is the guy in charge of all of NLA, so it makes sense that whoever the US president in 2054 was didn't make it onto the NLA arc. Like, there must have been a DC arc, or maybe they shoveled the president and Congress all the way to New York for that one. But either way, hey, maybe the president was from California, so his daughter ended up on the California arc. And of course, the daughter of the US president, back when you could still communicate across all of the US and it was territory on a planet that existed, and someone who is close to Maurice Chosan, who is in charge of everything, would probably also have to hide her identity if she wanted to go out on dangerous combat mission. The thing about all of this is the concept art of the Hraesvelgr is described as an unknown mech that is categorized as a Skell, but seems to be from much more advanced technology than Earth's. Hence why I like describing it as a more upgraded Ares, because the Ares Skells are also the most advanced looking Skells and the least Earth-like ones that you do get to use in the actual game. It also says that the right arm and the katana of the Skell are Rothian in design, and some accessories on it are things like fangs from space creatures, so presumably trophies. We do not know if any of this information is going to be canon to the version of the Hraesvelgr in Definitive Edition, but if any of those are the case, I think Emily makes more sense than Reina Sakuraba. Firstly, and most obviously, this is not a Sakuraba Industries developed Skell. It's probably some like top secret government thing that not even defense contractors are allowed to lay eyes on. Secondly, if it belongs to the Black Knight in any way, it makes more sense for it to have found its way to Emily, because the main theory for the identity of the Black Knight is Elma's original partner. Elma has high-up government contacts, and as such, her original partner would have also had those. And, well, again, the daughter of the last US president, who is already connected to Chosan, would have high-up government contacts and likely have known characters like Elma and her partner, if she did get retconned into existence as having always been a passenger on the White Whale the entire time. Speculation about the identity of the Black Knight isn't really a spoiler thing because there's no context beyond that, and if the Black Knight is Elma's partner, this is a character we've never seen on screen before, so a non-spoiler background for the situation with the partner as we know of him in the original game is that he and Elma fought together. They were on the same team in the military stuff that were the precursors to Blade, and in the battle over Mira, when the White Whale first got damaged and crashed, they were fighting together in a tandem Skell that was presumably lost at the time, and he ejected her from the Skell and sent her back to the White Whale, sacrificing himself so she and the White Whale were able to survive. The thing about this is that Skell was a tandem version of the Ares type, and we can see it fighting a little bit in the opening cutscene of the original game. And the fact that that exact Skell shows up in the new footage at the end of this trailer very heavily hints that Elma's partner is the identity of the Black Knight. So his Skell can't have been the Hraesvelgr, right? Well, there is some wiggle room because technically we only know that he piloted the tandem Ares in the battles that are shown in the opening cutscene there. And it appears like all of this fighting is just in that last final battle over Mira when the White Whale crashes. So he may have been piloting a Skell that was different to that one without Elma also in the cockpit beforehand. This is how we could still have the Hraesvelgr have been his Skell in the past and then get passed on to this new character, basically. He could have fought off space creatures along the way to Mira, and that's where he got his trophies, and then whoever this new pilot is picked up the Skell, and then on Mira got the right arm damaged and eventually was able to pick up a new right arm and a katana from a Rothian Skell fighting with those. It makes sense. Emily steals the top secret government thing, goes off on her own while also masquerading as a Blade member. This all kind of works for me. We'll find out more about this character probably when the game releases. I'm not sure we're going to get an unmasking an official name for them before then. We will probably have to get a nickname at some point, but as of now, even the Nintendo JP article only refers to them as a masked pilot. believe it or not, we can actually skip over a lot of the next minute of the trailer. It is just a compilation of various hype moments in cutscenes, with uncontrollable playing because it's a very hype song, and various lines from the original version of the main story chosen for hype purposes. This is the hype story section of the trailer, and I don't have much to say about most of the clips here. These are very faithfully recreated cutscenes from the original game. Everything in these cutscenes looks better because everything in the game looks better, and there's not a lot of close-ups or gameplay things to talk about. Like, we can see everyone's favorite character, Goetia. She looks basically the same, but all of the textures are better, and there might be some more polygons. I don't know. There's not much else to say, and any analysis I could make is redundant because I would be analyzing a story that's been out for almost 10 years. We do get surprisingly large amounts of Rothian content in this trailer, which is neat because, well, I joked about Goetia being everyone's favorite character. Gajurg and Gabuid are actually a lot of people's favorite characters, and the fact that they're putting Rothians in, and the Hreisvelger still has its unique looking right arm that allegedly comes from a Rothian Skell, makes me think that we are actually going to get more cool Rothian content in Definitive Edition, including hopefully playable both Gajurg and Gabuid, but I would settle for just Gajurg too. There is what I believe is a new voice line from who I believe is Nagi, questioning if it's possible for this to be their native planet. I cannot tell you for sure if this is new or not. However, there's a good chance it is new because I can't see them talking about any planet other than Mira in this way, and the only indigenous sentient life forms to Mira that we meet in the original game are the Nopon and El, and those are both very upfront about the fact that they are native to Mira, so no one would be asking a question in this way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we might be questioning if Mira is the native planet for some group other than those two. More importantly though, while this line is playing, we get some more new footage. A twin pair of Skells that have very interesting looking masks, and another brand new character. Of course, I say brand new, I only mean brand new to Definitive Edition, and not even quite that, because the two Skells are actually in the original game. They are the Neilnail Albus and the Neilnail Furvis, and are the bosses of one of the Time Attack missions. It's nothing too special, just kind of a challenge mode fight against the two Skells in Sylphalum, and they drop a material that's useful for crafting some of the level 60 Skell frames. In fact, these two are so mundane that they're not even in the confidential section of the original art book. And the only thing particularly interesting about their concept art is the fact that they are described as being powered by something called a logic drive, that is using the English term logic drive in the Japanese art book, which is the same as the propulsion system used in some mechs and ships in Xenosaga. This woman, on the other hand, is in the confidential material section and shares a page with the One Piece of Emily. Her name is Neilnail, the same as these two Skells. The best part about this is she is also named in the Nintendo JP article as Neilnail, using the exact same spelling as that name in the art book. It doesn't really say anything interesting about her other than she appears alongside the two strange Skells and has some relationship with them. So this doesn't really change much because she's obviously using the design as the character Neilnail from the concept art. I would be calling her that even if her name wasn't officially confirmed to be that. So yeah, that's cool. She appears. The Skells that share her name are also there. Her outfit is significantly different from the concept art, but that's to be expected. All of the actual canon characters from the original game look a bit different in their concept art too. Another thing worth mentioning is that her name in English might be somewhat retconned. And that is because in both the art book and the Nintendo JP article, her name is written as Niru Neru, with the dot indicating that those are two separate names in between the Neil and the Nail part. The two Skells that you fight in the original game are just Niru Neru, one word. So those are rendered as Neilnail, one word in the English version, but it is very likely that her intended name, or the name of this actual character and not the Skells, is Neilnail, two separate words. So don't be surprised if it's pronounced closer to Neilnail and not Neilnail as one word like I have been saying. Even if you haven't seen the concept art, she might look a little familiar. Unnecessarily pretty woman, face markings, blonde hair, fuzzy ears? Yes. In the art book, it is confirmed that she is identified as a Clurian, the same species as Celica. So it seems like this canon version of the character is also going to be that. And that is fantastic news to me, because, well, Celica is one of my favorite characters in the original game, and she doesn't get to do anything. If another member of her species is showing up, well, that changes a lot about her actual character arc, as she is a refugee from the clue system, and very likely will give her a lot more interesting character interactions. And I don't know, it would be kind of neat if she was actually a required character, because you never actually have to recruit her, which is kind of crazy. She shows up in story missions and moves to NLA in story missions, but if you don't want her as a party member, you do not have to take her as a party member, but you should take her as a party member. I would love for her to be upgraded to actual main story, permanent character, and the fact that Neil Nail is showing up at all basically confirms they are answering more than just a couple of the unanswered questions from the original game, because a lot of people really wanted to know what those 2 random Skells from One Time Attack mission were, and hey, the Black Knight was technically in the original Xenoblade X. Neil Nail is the first confirmed character who was featured in the secret confidential section of the original art book to be making their first appearance in X Definitive Edition, and I can only hope more characters will follow. As for any story analysis and significance, this couple seconds of Neil Nail stuff is interspersed within main story cutscene stuff that ranges from in between like chapter 4 and chapter 9. A lot of it's out of order, but that's the general range they're pulling from. Keep in mind, the Hresvelger and Pilot stuff was in between the combat demonstration and the beginning of the story montage, so not interspersed within the story, and the line they played heavily suggests that this will be an optional party member, while the Neil Nail stuff is smack dab in the middle of a bunch of main story things, and the chapters they pull from are generally chapters where you're exploring the middle 3 continents, Noctilum, Sylvalum, and of course, Oblivia. So I genuinely think it's likely that this Neil Nail encounter will either be a new portion of a story chapter, a brand new story chapter in between pre-existing ones, or some kind of new affinity mission that is required to progress the main story at some point and can be unlocked during the chapters where you're generally exploring Oblivia. This happens, you meet your first Clurian, and then later on, you meet Celica, and Celica's affinity mission not only takes you to Sylvalum, but also requires a main story chapter that takes you to Sylvalum, so it's very possible that they're now changing the story so that Celica is the second Clurian you meet, and eventually you will get both her and Neil Nail in NLA at the same time, or have some sort of encounter between them and learn more about Clue. This is very interesting for spoiler reasons especially. Throughout this little section of the trailer, we get close-ups on the faces of the 2 Skells, then a wide shot of them taking off, showing that this takes place at the base of the Oblivia Ring, and then a close-up of Neil Nail's face. In the shot of the Skells taking off, we can see Neil Nail's full body, showing that her outfit is still very similar to the concept art, and also that she is standing next to Ryan's Xenoblade. This looks like an affinity mission cutscene specifically, because in affinity missions, all of your party members that are not required for that mission, and as such would have dialogue and cutscenes for that mission, are treated like they do not exist, or are standing just slightly in predetermined positions for party member slots 2, 3, and 4. There are no other characters here, so either you canonically have to do this alone, or they intentionally chose to not bring any party members here, and it does look like Neil Nail is standing next to you, fighting these guys or observing these guys. So she might be a temporary ally, or even become a full party member at this point. Very interesting. We'll need a little bit more information before we can determine exactly what Neil Nail's deal is. Anyway, for the rest of the story montage, it just goes back to business as usual. A bunch of story scenes, uncontrollables playing, disconnected pieces of dialogue that are just there for hype purposes. Though the funniest thing is, it does end with Elma saying, "Let's go." And I don't know why they're still doing this. It seems like they're, at least in English, trying to turn "let's go" into some big important phrase for the Xenoblade series. Because, okay, Shulk saying "everyone, let's go" is a fairly memorable and somewhat iconic line from Xenoblade 1. Sure, that makes sense. When he's added to Smash, he says a variation of that when he activates his final Smash, so it sticks in your mind even more as a Shulk thing. But they briefly tried to turn it into a Xenoblade thing as a whole and not just a Shulk thing, because the first dubbed Xenoblade 2 trailer ends with Rex saying "everyone, let's go," and now here this X trailer ends with Elma also saying "let's go." I don't understand. I feel like it's too close to "here we go," which they are still using as a Mario catchphrase, so I don't think it's a good idea for Nintendo to turn another generic phrase into a catchphrase for one of their IPs when their most iconic one already has one that sounds like it. Anyway, though, the remainder of the trailer after the Xenoblade X Definitive Edition logo pops up is the domain only of spoilers, so I'm going to avoid talking about that for now and instead move on to the Japanese website for the game. There are several tabs here, and I'm not going to go in depth with this. You can look at the site yourself, it will be linked in the description. Lol JK, because while getting that screenshot of the website for editing purposes, I noticed that there is a tab grayed out there, and it reads, "After Story, coming soon." So it looks like there will in fact be at least another trailer or a direct spot or something talking about the new story content in more detail. So that's neat. Most of the information here is information that is very, very easily findable because it's identical to stuff from the original Xenoblade X. So I don't have anything to talk about here. The most important thing is, if you go to the Blade tab, you can access a lot of renders and voice samples for a bunch of important characters. There are complete renders for Elma, Lyn, Tatsu, then a 3x5 collage of a bunch of optional party members, then Vandam, Nagi, and Maurice Chosan. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. I am not going to go over every single individual character's design here, but it does show their render and a screenshot of them in-game, including characters that have never shown up in a trailer yet. So, like, say, Mia, Fog, Hope, those characters haven't been seen even in wide shots, but you are able to see a decently high resolution render of them, as well as a very unfortunately low 440 by 244 pixel actual screenshot of the game. Celica, I know people are kind of unsure about because her ears have been shrunk to match Neil nails, and her eyes look a little deader, I guess, and her face markings are also translucent, different color than Neil nails, but the consistency of them is kind of the same. Murderous does not look very different. That makes sense. She was perfect as she was. These are very expressive. They're more expressive than most of the original renders or the character models from the original X, so that's a very good sign for the animation in this game. I don't know why Doug is asserting claims about our air fryer ownership, but he sure is, and good lord, Gwyn is extremely uncanny. I thought his whole point was that he's supposed to look kind of dorky and boyish, but he got a Giga Chad treatment here that does not really suit his character, but it's funny, so I'll still let it slide. As I mentioned before, all the important gameplay footage has been extracted and compiled by YouTube user Perfectly Nintendo, and I will be using their upload of this footage to analyze from instead of going through the site itself. If you want to explore that, you can explore that. There are no more spoilers for the main story there than there are in this trailer. I'll also just be going through the clips in the order they are in the compilation video. The first one already gives us a lot to look at. We are fighting a Grotto Mortiful in Noctilum, with a full party consisting of the main character, who is named Cross in all these Japanese clips instead of Ryan Xenoblade, Elma, Doug, his first actual in-game appearance, and Lyn. There's something very obvious there that I'm going to talk about last for this clip. We can see a few interesting things. I don't know why this person only has 5 arts equipped, but they sure do. We can see that this is an on-foot clip where the name of the ranged weapon is not displayed here, so there you go. We can see the new Skell fuel tracker on the right side there. Interestingly, it was not present in the Skell combat clip earlier in the trailer, but it is here in this ground combat clip. So I'm assuming that is something you can turn off in battle, and it just is disabled here. We can see the full instant recast meter, and it looks like it goes up to 7.5 segments, which is kind of a very arbitrary thing, but as we've seen before, you can spend fractions of segments, so it does make sense that this bar can be in fractions of segments for its full state. Now, maybe you can upgrade it to go further than this, and this is just either the default size or a size they happen to have statistically wise in this clip, because it is still narrower than the morale level bar's 3 big segments. So jury's out on that one, but we know it can at least get this big. We are fighting Mortifols here, and something very cool is the icon for a sound detection enemy has been changed to look like a little sound cone thing, which better matches Xenoblade 1, as opposed to just kind of being a little lightning bolt icon like it was in the original, which I understand them changing, not only for brand consistency, but it also just kind of makes more sense. In all of these battle clips, I'm not going to go over all the arts. If you've played the original Xenoblade X, you can recognize all of these arts by icon, and good for you. It's not worth analyzing them here because they're likely going to function more or less exactly the same as they did in the original game. If there's a new icon or something, I will point it out, but it's not worth talking about every individual art in this long a video. There is a plus button prompt in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, which was not present in any of the battle clips in the main trailer. It just says Battle Command, which is the exact same button that brought up the list of battle commands for your party members in the original game, so that whole list is probably still going to be there. Now though, for the elephant in the room, all 4 characters are level 62 here. The level cap of the original game was just level 60, and every single enemy fought in all of this footage is the same level or within the level range for that enemy in the original game. The one potential outcome for this is that these characters have just been artificially leveled up for no reason for the purposes of these trailers, because they also only appear in the website footage, and this might have been made more directly by Monolith and not Nintendo's trailer team or something like that. But the other possibility is that in the new story, the level cap will be unlocked. We will see a higher level than 62 later on, but my guess was always going to be that in concurrence with the new story content, we would get a level cap raise from 60 to 70, because the new content is going to be like an MMO expansion, and the original Xenoblade X is like a mostly offline MMO. The biggest concern with this level cap raise is not that they're not going to make new content designed around it, but that it will invalidate all of the old content, which I think is a very valid concern. You can kind of ruin all of the challenge for the level 60 hard level cap content from the original game if you just go in at level 70 with level 70 gear and new art upgrades and stuff like that. I do not think there's a lot of reason to worry yet, though, and that's for a couple reasons. The first thing is, we have only seen enemies from the early and mid-game so far. It just happens that sometimes the party members vastly outclass them in terms of level in these clips. So this is stuff that you would encounter early on in your progression through the main story and your leveling journey, so this would not be changed regardless of what the level cap was. Secondly, there's always the chance that your level cap will remain at 60 until some sort of story event in the brand new story. So it's possible that if you want to get the original endgame experience, you can just not start any of the new story content. And at the end of the trailer, it does confirm that there is at least some new explorable area, so there's a big possibility that you somehow get your level cap raised through a canonical story event that powers the characters up or unlocks their potential. And then thirdly, there's a good chance that they buffed the levels of some endgame content from the original game to be concurrent with levels above 60 but before the new level cap, or even the new level cap. There are plenty of just regular enemies and tyrants and side quests and stuff that are level 60, but not level 60 in a special, oh, this is endgame level cap stuff way, just in a, this is normal content that happens to be at the highest level you can get to. Then there is actual hard endgame stuff, and what they could do is just say, make some of this design for level 62, make some of it level 65. There is a lot of level 60 stuff from the original game that is only level 60 because it is locked behind other stuff that requires high levels, or is locked behind completing the original main story. That doesn't all have to be level 60. And then there's also the possibility that we're going to get some kind of expert mode like Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition has, and if that's the case, you could just level yourself down to 60. That way you would only be able to equip up to level 60 gear and up to level 60 Skell frames, and if you want the pure original experience, just don't equip any new gear whatsoever. There you go. There is very likely going to be a way you can do the original endgame content in some sort of challenging way without losing what made some of that special. And we're obviously going to get brand new endgame content if the level cap in the main game has raised. Keep in mind, the raised level cap here very, very heavily indicates that the new story will be directly connected to the original story and not a separate campaign. So you're going to get new content regardless. And I think there will still be a lot of ways to enjoy the old content in something close to its original form. There are a few clips of this exact party fighting enemies of various levels throughout Noctilum, and that's all cool and good, but the last clip is the most important one, as in that one we see the character move from far away from the enemy to closer to the enemy, and we can see that the two melee arts on the left, which are just Assault Hammer and Rising Blade again, do have the same red dotted circle and arrow thing on them, and that disappears when they get close into melee range. So I was right about that Skell art, but it was not using the icon of a melee art from the original game, so I might just be stupid. Maybe that is a ranged art that has a very short range. I don't know. Genuinely, I thought that was an icon for a ranged art. The other thing here is that they have a decoy round equipped. It's the art all the way on the right, the purple one with the circle and burst icon on it. And that inflicts taunt, and that has a new eye icon where the topple icon on Assault Hammer is. So it looks like taunt is considered a big combo reaction in Xenoblade X. There's another probe being installed, and then we get several Skell combat clips. There's not a lot interesting here to talk about. It's mostly just showing Skells firing weapons that are cool. They go through a bunch of different low-level Skell frames. They all have like one art equipped, and then they use it and it looks cool and they hit a big enemy. The big thing to notice here though is some of these are low-level frames fighting high-level enemies. The first clip is a level 30 Lila fighting a level 14 Tyrant, sure. Then there's a level 30 Inferno fighting a level 48 guy in Cauldros. Then level 30 Amdusias fighting a giant level 42 Zdom. And then a level 59 in Cauldros being fought by a level 30 Inferno. I don't know about all this stuff. They show off most of the Skell models and a lot of the weapon types. We can also see the player character is level 83 here, which suggests that the level cap is going to be at least 90, maybe even 99 like every other game in the series. And that is crazy, because that could mean that, yeah, maybe they change the level scaling around with things, and maybe there isn't a lot of new story content, and it only goes up to, say, like level 70, level 75, like a lot of the other games in the series. Or it could mean that they just straight up added enough new content to take us from level 60 to level 99, which is 3 to 4 MMO expansions worth of content instead of just the one I was expecting, and that could kind of be crazy. Anyway, unlike the trailer's depiction of Skell combat, the instant recast bar is present here, and it is full, going up to an entire 12 segments. We do not know if this is 12 segments because it's been upgraded to 12 segments, or if it's 12 segments because you get 7.5 on foot or 12 in the Skell. Couldn't tell you. We'll find out about that later. This is the one brand new mechanic to this game that they just have not told us much about yet. Another thing to note is enemy aggro icons. Throughout all of the battle clips in this entire compilation, there are the sight and sound ones, like I mentioned before, but there are two different versions of them. There are regular circular ones, and then there are starburst ones. And I cannot tell what each of those mean for sure, just based on this footage. It doesn't indicate if something's in combat or not. It doesn't indicate some sort of danger level comparing your level to the enemies, because the player is 83 in all of these Skell clips. Some enemies have circles, some have starbursts, and some don't. I don't know what this means. We do see some starbursts out of combat, so it doesn't just mean engaged enemies, and we see circles in combat. All I can think of is that if something has the starburst, it will join other enemies, or it's more aggressive in seeking you out. and the circle is less so. Like maybe a starburst has more sensitivity to that kind of thing. These icons are different than how they were in the original game, so it's likely a definitive edition tutorial will explain these. There are other on-foot clips that show off soul voices and overdrive. Some of them show the character with arts that they didn't have before. Some of them show them with like dual swords and dual guns instead. Doug's not in the party for these. Everyone's level 43 or 44. The player's actually playing as Elma in one of them, so that's kind of neat. Remember, break is referred to as stagger in X, so I'm going to be referring to that for the rest of this analysis. We can see the stagger icon on arts, and we can see enemies that have been both staggered and toppled, and the duration of that reaction is to the left of their HP bar. Again, a very Xenoblade 3 way of depicting things. Since taunt is considered a reaction in this game, and we can actually see decoy round in a couple of these clips, which is another assault rifle art that taunts. I don't know why it has two of them, but sure. So it's possible that the duration of the taunt will also be to the left of the HP bar like that. There's also a clip showing a bit more involved Overdrive gameplay than the trailer did, and in this one, both Elma and Cross are in Overdrive, so we can see that Elma gets a bonus for party Overdrive here, because the player is playing as her and not Cross this time, as well as the player and party Overdrive things that were in the original game but have been spiced up and again look a lot like Xenoblade 3 chain attack damage numbers. There are then some shots of the character creator for both male and female Cross, and it does look like there are several new options added, but it is about as restrictive as it was in the original game, unfortunately, with things like certain hairstyles being tied to certain face types, which is really unfortunate. The good news is we see male Cross scroll through the entire face paint selection, and it does appear like those are not gender locked. Additionally, a few new ones have been added. There's one that resembles Cosmos' visor from Xenosaga 2. That is when her visor wasn't a thing actually on her head, but built into her forehead, so that's kind of neat. There's one that resembles just a very minimalistic Monado across the forehead. And then there's also Nia's face markings, as well as one that looks sort of like the ether lines on Izzard's face. The Nia face markings one is especially funny because, well, if we go back to female Cross, we can see that for at least this face type, she has two new hairstyles, Nia's and Mithra's. Nia's does look kind of cursed without the cat ears, I'm not gonna lie. It genuinely looks weird just as a flat rounded hairstyle, but Mithra's looks just as good as it always did, and I don't know, it's neat seeing Mithra with a reddish brown hair. I guess that's kind of like a pirate-y Mithra. Either way though, high Entia wings were already an equipable fashion gear item in the original game, so at the very least, if you have a female Cross, you can give her Nia's face markings, Mithra's hairstyle, and Melia's head wings, which is just like triple best girl in one. So do that, please. Be peak. So you can see a glimpse of a lot of these options, and do remember, you are able to edit your character's appearance from the ground up later on in the game after completing a certain side quest. The only thing you could not change in the original game was your character's name, which I'm going to be real, is a little silly. You are allowed to swap between male and female at will whenever you want to, for free after completing a certain side quest. And everyone on Mira will automatically adjust to correctly treating you as whatever gender you have just swapped to, but you can't change your name. I feel like Definitive Edition should change that. There's no indication of whether or not they will, though. Another thing that's shown is both male and female Cross's voice actor option list, and kind of sadly, these are the exact same voices the original game had. Now, I'm not saying any of these are bad. Most of them are great, and a lot of them are cameos from older Xeno games, but there are only these 10 options. They haven't added more, such as the Xenoblade 2 and 3 cameos I was hoping they'd add, since those games released in between the original X and this DE, meaning only really Xenosaga and Xenoblade 1 are represented here. The good news is, the English versions of the Avatar only had 7 voice options, so there are 3 slots unused for both male and female Cross. And despite 3 of the options not being used, party member interaction dialogue was still recorded for at least some of them, so it is very, very possible that they could still be added without needing to get every single voice actor who played a party member to record just a few new pieces of battle dialogue interacting with those 3 new voices, which means there are technically 6 options for the dub to bring in cameos, which I would very much appreciate. Everything after the character creator stuff, so honestly the last 4.5 minutes of the compilation or so, I do not have a lot to talk to you about, unfortunately. Most of it is just exploration shots of running around, generic combat shots, and generic cutscene shots. Yes, I could comment on how beautiful the exploration is, but this video is in much lower quality than the actual trailer because most of this stuff was designed to be played either in a very small embedded player on the website itself or slightly blurred in the background of other still images and text. So the video quality just is not as good as the actual trailer, so it's harder to talk about the visuals. A lot of the cutscene footage is also either extended clips or the same clips from the same cutscenes in the trailer. Some of them are even from the original trailer. There are a lot of new places that are technically seen for the first time in DE, but I don't have a lot to talk about there, unfortunately. We do get to see DE's Manon for the first time, which is kind of neat, I guess. The only thing about that is, like all of the other aliens we've seen so far, their designs haven't changed at all. It's just the textures that are better and video crusty. So it is hard to see how the textures are better on those guys so far. Absolutely check all this footage out if you haven't been sold on the scale of Mira yet, because there are a lot of clips that show that off. There is one more clip of flying around in the Hraesvelgr, but the UI is completely turned off for that clip, so you can't really learn anything else about that. One thing I did think was kind of funny is this one shot of absolute cryptid Elma, because they blurred her this much in the scene where you exit your pod for the first time. I thought that was funny. It is, again, very faithfully recreated from the original game, but the new graphics made it sillier, I guess. I don't really know. There's one clip showing off Skell binding, and it works basically exactly the same as it always did. There are some more clips of being level 62. The only Skell frames they use are either the default level 20 urban or any of the other generic level 30 frames. So you're not really gaining much from being level 62 in combat if you're in your Skell. Don't really know what to say there. There are a few clips of taunt being used, both by the player in a Skell and by a party member on foot. In this case, it's Lyn, but Gwyn is actually in the party in a couple of these clips as well, so that's kind of neat. His new look does still somewhat terrify me. And I guess it does sort of deconfirm that there is any sort of thing on the enemy's HP bar saying they've been taunted. I don't really know for sure when the player is the one doing it, because the Skell clip of the player taunting cuts away very quickly after the taunt goes out, but I do know as a fact that when another party member is the one taunting it, that does not appear there. There is also this one clip here that is supposed to be talking about soul voices or different types of arts or something, I'm not entirely sure, but it does show the player picking up a collectible while in combat, which is not something you could do in the original game, but once again, is a neat quality of life thing added in Xenoblade 3 that it seems like is being carried over into this game. Also in this clip, you can see the quick recast meter, and it only has 4 and change segments on it. Plus, there are also other clips in this compilation that show it with an even 8 segments, so it does appear that this is something that can be upgraded as you progress throughout the game. I'm guessing there's some way to gain half of a segment every now and then, be it an increment of 5 levels or something like that. Honestly, gaining half a segment every 5 levels until level 60, the original level cap, does kind of make sense, so maybe that's a possibility. We do not know how the Skell version of it is tied to the ground version, but we will find out when the game comes out, I'm sure. I believe that does it for all of these clips, at least for the interesting things I could find there. Again, if you want to look through them yourself, there's no spoilers, there's a lot of cool exploration stuff, and the video will be linked in the description, so you can just go through all 7.5 minutes on your own. The only other relevant thing for now that I found on the website is this one image of a brand new outfit and longsword. And now, we can enter the spoiler section. Hello, welcome to tomorrow, and by tomorrow I mean today. Everything you just heard was recorded on the day the trailer came out with an asterisk. It was less than 24 hours after it came out, but a good chunk of that was recorded after midnight in my time zone. It is still Friday, but it's now Friday after I've had a little bit of sleep. Can you tell that it hasn't been too long since I recorded the last bit of audio? Anyway, just for posterity's sake, all of that stuff was recorded before I slept at all after the trailer came out. And now I have slept. And let's talk about spoilers, I guess. This will obviously require spoilers from the original Xenoblade X, but I will also have to talk about stuff from the mainline Xenoblade numbered trilogy. I do not see anything in this trailer that hints at any sort of new direct connection to it, but I know people are going to want to hear my takes relative to that kind of thing, so it does need to make it in as well. First thing we need to do is expand on Nilnail a lot, because she is very, very interesting for the reason that she is another Chlorian character who is actually associated with technology. Celica seems to have been from a somewhat rural village, so you can't really learn much about her. She knows how to pilot a Skell, but that's about it. However, Nilnail seems to be coming with the two Skells that share her name, which means she probably is an engineer of some sort, or has something to do with active development on Chlorian technology. And that is a big deal because Luxar says that the barrier around the Lifehold is a Treon barrier, the sort of thing that is not seen outside the clue system. And, well, where did Elma get that from? We now have examples of two Chlorian characters, and they are both very obviously the same species and look a lot like each other. However, Elma's true form does not look a lot like them, which means Elma probably isn't Chlorian. This then suggests that, hey, maybe Nilnail is the person Elma got the Chlorian technology that made it into the White Whale and the Lifehold and the Skells from. That would be kind of cool. If we're exploring Elma's past with the Black Knight, which it does seem like is happening because it is extraordinarily likely that he is in fact her old partner, another character from space that she knew before even coming to Earth would be a very interesting thing to explore. Remember, we do not actually know what species Elma is, period. There are a lot of kind of one-off Xenoform characters who we don't learn any of that kind of thing about. Like, we don't really know what Luxar is. His species is Ganglion, which is different from being a member of the Ganglion. We don't really know who Goetia is. We don't know who Reese is. She's an evil counterpart to Celica, but doesn't look like a Chlorian. Now that we have two examples, I think it's a lot less likely for their appearances to vary as much as, say, including both Celica and Elma under the same species, which just kind of makes it seem like we're going to learn more about Elma. The original X more or less ended after getting the secret revealed that Elma was an alien, and one of the cliffhangers was something that even she didn't foresee or understand. So there wasn't really any time to learn anything else about her. She has one post-game affinity mission, but that is about resolving things that she did after coming to Mira, let alone after coming to Earth. So there's no room there to learn anything about how she was in space. And then she's basically not required for any other post-game content. So now that we have post-game story, I think it would be neat to explore Elma's past prior to coming to Earth, since we already had a pretty good idea of what it was like after she got there, and if the Black Knight is her partner, we're going to learn even more about that. So it seems like Elma is getting a character exploration. It would be nice to know about her character prior to her Earth arc. Another thing very worth pointing out is that Lao is involved in this new story content, and his Japanese voice actor, Keiji Fujiwara, passed away in 2020. If you go to Lao's bio on the Japanese website for the game, you will see that he has two voice actors listed, Fujiwara and Takanori Hoshino. So it seems like all of Fujiwara's old lines will still be used, and Hoshino will only be providing his voice for any new dialogue, which I think is probably the best possible compromise here. And if they split it so that Lao only has the new VA after coming back, they can even have a story explanation for why his voice changed. And we don't know if Lao will be playable in the new story at all. They could even re-record all his battle dialogue with Hoshino and only have him voice him in battle there too, instead of switching back to the old lines. As far as we can tell, Lao himself doesn't actually speak in the trailer, so we can't hear Hoshino's performance as him, and this also doesn't tell us anything about whether or not Matt Mercer will be playing him in the new content in the dub. Obviously, if Lao's voice canonically changes in universe and there's a story reason for that, I'm assuming new Lao is also going to have a new voice actor in English, but if there's no acknowledgement in universe, Mercer probably is going to be back. Both of the Lao VAs have had many prominent and important roles in Japanese media, but I do think it's very worth pointing out that Fujiwara was the Japanese dub voice for Robert Downey Jr., not just in the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. in general. And Hoshino still is the Japanese dub voice for Henry Cavill. Really funny connection. The only other character who's listed as having multiple VAs is Irina, who has both her original VA, Nao Takamori, as well as Ami Matsushima listed. As far as I can tell, Takamori is just retired. Her most prominent voice role has been Blaze the Cat from the Sonic series, and since voicing Irina in 2015, the only character she is credited for is Blaze. And barring her reused lines from the original Sonic generations being in Sonic X Shadow Generations, the last game she was credited for as Blaze is Sonic at the Olympic Games from 2020, so it seems like she didn't really voice a lot of characters to begin with, and has just retired from voice acting work. Matsushima, on the other hand, appears to be a relatively young up-and-comer, as she only has listed credits from 2018-2019-ish, and most of those are either just generic additional voices or one-off characters that appear in a couple episodes of an anime that has a few episodes. She has like a dozen minor roles in Digimon Ghost Game, but genuinely, Irina seems like it might be her biggest role yet, and if she has a lot of new lines, could be somewhat of a breakout for her, which is kind of neat. It's happened a few times dub-wise, most recently with Harry McIntyre in Xenoblade 3, but generally speaking, the VAs in the Japanese cast of Xenoblade games are already established ones in the industry, so it's kind of cool seeing a relatively major character from a Xenoblade game being taken over by a newcomer who will get a chance to prove herself with Irina's new stuff. For now, though, all this confirms for us is that Irina will have new voice lines in the new story, which, as you'll see in a minute, is something that could have been confirmed by observing the trailer, so we don't know whether or not Kari Karanen will be back as her dub VA, or if she will also be replaced. Irina seems a lot less likely to have a story reason for her voice change, so who knows. The very first shot of this special spoilery section is what appears to be a continuation of the shot at the end of the last trailer. It is Lao and the Black Knight on the beach together. Lao has now sat up and started looking out over the water, and the Black Knight's hood is down, showing his hair. I am going to be hovering on this specific frame for the entirety of the discussion of this shot instead of playing it slowly or looping it or anything like that, just because this is the best actual look at the Black Knight's face we can get, as he is sort of halfway turned towards the screen. He has short, light-colored hair, and it is really, really hard to gauge his skin tone from this, because the sun is also directly behind him. Guys, I do have to apologize for something. Me saying that this guy is Albedo from Xenosaga was a joke. I do not actually think it is Albedo. I have seen a distressing amount of people take it seriously off of a one-off joke tweet I made. I really need to notice my influence and make jokes like that a lot more obvious jokes, I guess. Story-wise, you could probably justify this somehow being Albedo if you really want to stretch the definitions of how things work, but narrative-wise and logic-wise, there is no reason for this to be Albedo. This is almost certainly a new character. As I've said before, if this is anyone other than Elma's old partner, or rather, if this character who is almost certainly Elma's old partner has an additional secret identity beyond that, it's going to be Malos's version of Pyra, or just some other expression of Logos, in such a way where, yes, he's tied to other things from the series, but for all intents and purposes is a brand new character. It is also very worth listening to the line being said, as a voice, who is presumably the Black Knight, says, "People still need me. Humanity still needs me." Which, yeah, absolutely makes sense for a renowned hero among the people on Mira, who is presumed dead but is now returned and going to be helping them out in some way. The general consensus that fans have always had about Elma's partner since the original game came out was that he is some sort of canon incarnation of this character from the secret section of the art book. This guy does not have a name given, but he's described as the protagonist, a man in his late 20s, and it is specifically noted that unlike the Avatar character, he has a defined personality. The general consensus among fans is that prior to the Avatar character being introduced and the general restructuring of Xenoblade X's main story, this man was going to be the main character. He's described as being in his late 20s, which would put him about the same age Elma pretends to be. And he has a very pronounced nose in this art, which does sort of track with the nose we can see on the Black Knight in these couple frames. Perhaps more interesting is the fact that we cannot tell his skin color from this specific shot. Obviously, they chose this one to keep him being mysterious, and we're not going to get a good look at him probably until the game comes out, but despite the lighting being what it is, Lao's skin color looks basically the same as it does in every other shot of him, while this guy's is either in shadow, or maybe he does not have a skin color that a human would naturally have, and it's gray or something like that. I have shown you a cropped version of the page of the protagonist's concept art. In the lower right-hand corner of page 262 of the art book, there are other pieces that appear to be additional concepts for this character. First off, there's one that has the exact same face, but a much shorter hairstyle that very closely matches the one the Black Knight is wearing in the trailer. But below that are several very obviously alien-looking faces, meaning that even back in the day, there is a chance that, like Elma, this protagonist was actually an alien pretending to be human. And yes, obviously there's a very big possibility that this concept was worked into the character of Elma when the plot was changed. However, he says, people still need me, humanity still needs me, which somewhat suggests to me that he might also not be human in X Definitive Edition. And you know what? That does kind of make sense. Elma's trusted old partner, someone whose only potential concept designs we have describe him as being about the same age she pretends to be. In narration over the ending cutscene, Lyn does state that Elma came to Earth alone, but we don't know if this is an omniscient narrator using Lyn's voice, or if this is the character of Lyn from this point in the story narrating non-canonically to the player. Keep in mind, this is the same monologue where she implies she thinks that the physical planet Earth has not been destroyed despite it blowing up on screen and her having been awake to see that. Also, obviously, there are new Lyn lines in this game, so they could very easily retcon this and remove the line. But more importantly, of those characters, Elma's partner is lost before he would have had a chance to reveal himself as not human. The reason we know Elma came to Earth is because she reveals herself as not having been originally from Earth. This guy, as far as everyone knew, was human until his dying day. If he comes back, then maybe he would be able to reveal himself truly as a xenoform. Also, as an aside, I think there is a good chance we are going to see physical flashback cutscenes that have him in them instead of him only being referred to in dialogue. So there might be additions to existing cutscenes or brand new cutscenes showing him off before he shows up in person in the present time in this new epilogue story. But yeah, we already know from other parts of the concept art that Elma's true form went through a lot of design iterations before settling on the one in the final game, and going back to the page for the protagonist man, this one face all the way at the bottom right, staring directly into the camera, and then the one staring to the left right next to it, both look very similar to various iterations of concept art for Elma's true form, so there's a very, very good chance that even if these characters did not both exist in the story at the same time, they were thought of as having been from the same alien race. Combine that with the fact that Elma is the only example of her species we've seen so far, so we do not know what range of skin colors they can naturally have, which means if this guy does have a grayish skin tone, it could just be another skin color that species can have. Like, I don't know how diverse human skin colors are in the real world, and given the themes of Xenoblade X, it would make sense to introduce a similar sort of diversity within the alien species present in the story. The only thing potentially giving pause here is the fact that Elma's true form's hair is very crystalline looking, or almost like fiber optic cables, and this guy's hair does appear to have the same texture as human mimeosome hair, so who really knows for sure? The other possibility is that this is just a lighting trick, and he has similar silvery white hair and a similar skin tone to Elma in her mimeosome as opposed to her true form, which would also probably confirm basically the exact same thing about him. What I think we can definitely say is that this guy is this game's iteration of Elma's partner, and we'll see even more things confirming that later on. The next shot takes place in Oblivia, focusing on Elma as destruction surrounds her. And this is where things get extra spicy, because we are actually fighting the ghosts in this new storyline. The Ganglion has been completely dismantled, and the only way anyone else from the Samara Federation can make it to Mira to try and get revenge on humanity is by also becoming trapped on Mira. From the opening cutscene, we could always tell that the faction that shot the White Whale down was the ghosts and not the Ganglion, so we are finally going to actually be able to get revenge for the ship here. This scene takes place at what I believe is the Leaning Ring in Oblivia, so not the Giant Ring, the second biggest one on the southwest edge of the continent. And very curiously, the only characters present here are Elma, Lyn, and Tatsu. No cross to be seen, so it's possible that these two will not be with you in your party for this part of the new storyline, and you'll be somewhere else. Maybe you'll come in and make the save, or maybe you'll be in a completely different area of the planet. We do see Elma, Lyn, and Cross in the new area together later on, so they're obviously still going to be important party members for the bulk of the new story, but hey, they're apart at least here. And hey, guess what? It gets even spicier as the next shot shows a Skell flying through the ghosts and destroying them. And over that, we hear lines from, I believe, Lyn saying, "That's Skell," and then Doug saying, "You're still alive?" Doug has been friends with Elma for a very long time. Lyn is a Skell aficionado. It would make sense for Lyn to recognize Elma's old Skell and Doug to recognize the partner. So all of this very heavily suggests that that is who the Black Knight actually is. And yes, as cool as this scene looks, and as much as people are freaking out about how, oh, there's a new Ares with Ouroboros cores in it, you have to keep in mind, this Ares Skell with this exact design existed in the original Xenoblade X in 2015. It is visible in the opening cutscene, fighting ghosts throughout NLA and in space. This is just the best view of it we've gotten, and its pilot is presumably going to be an important character in the new story. These Skells and the Ouroboros from Xenoblade 3 were designed by the same designer, so they share a lot of motifs in common, as well as the fact that this specific Ares is a tandem model and the Ouroboroses are literal fusions of two characters working together. Xenoblade 3 borrowed a lot of unused concepts from X, so it makes sense. We cannot call the Skell a Skell using Ouroboros motifs. Ouroboros stole design motifs from this Skell and from the ghosts. As far as we know in universe for Xenoblade X, these cores are antimatter cores that provide power to all of these Skells. So yeah, that's what this is. Is there going to be a connection to Ouroboros? Maybe. Do keep in mind, the matter of the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 was likened as matter and antimatter, so there is a connection like that because of how interlinking works. You need Keves and Agnes to make that work, but this does not confirm any connections. It just confirms that they didn't change Choco's designs in Xenoblade X to not use the same motifs he reused in Xenoblade 3. And yes, by the way, the ghosts and Mobius were inspired by the same thing from Xenosaga, which is why the cores on the ghosts we can see here are pink like the Mobius. And then obviously the designs of the Ares, particularly this one, which I think is the Ares we see in this shot but without any armor on it, so just the frame, are what inspired especially the Kavesi Ouroboros, so that's why the cores on this Skell are orange like an actual Ouroboros from 3. The Hraesvelg does have these cores in it as well, they're just light blue, suggesting that yes, it is an Ares type Skell, but isn't a direct successor to this specific Ares unit. We then see a character in a blade pilot suit take their helmet off and walk forward a little bit. Going frame by frame, we can clearly see that this is not Lao, because they walk forward enough where we can see that if this was Lao, his hair would be visible, and in like the very, very last frame, we can see just a little bit of hair, and it is a silvery gray that does match up with the Black Knight's hair from the earlier shot. We were also able to tell even from the original trailer that instead of wearing heavier armor, the Black Knight now has a blade pilot suit on underneath his cloak, So this makes sense to be the scene where he's formally revealed to be alive to the main characters of the main game story, including a lot of people who knew him. From left to right in the background we can see Elle, Doug, Lynn. I'm assuming that's a little bit of Tatsu on the ground hidden by grass in between Lynn, and then to her right Elma, in her Mimeosome, not her true form surprisingly enough, Cross, and then Arena and Gwyn. Obviously these guys make sense to be around. These 7 characters and Tatsu are the ones who will go into the Lifehold core whether or not you have them in your actual gameplay party. So it makes sense for them to be the main characters as a jumping off point for this new storyline as well. Also, of course, the Lynn line talking about the Skell is probably from the same cutscene as the shot flying over the ocean fighting the ghosts here, and Doug's line about someone still being alive is probably from right here where the Black Knight is revealed to still be alive. The last shots then show off a brand new area. Voiceover from Elma says, "This Skell was always leading the way, guiding us where we're needed." I cannot think of any Skell she could possibly be referring to here other than the tandem Ares she and the Black Knight used to use. Keep in mind, as far as we know, that is the original Ares Skell. We don't know much about the Hraesvelg, and the Prague Ares Lao steals during the story was being developed during the story. As far as I know, it had started development on Mira, whereas the tandem Ares was lost before humanity even made it to Mira. And then the Ares 70 and 90 are improved models of the Ares, developed by some people from Blade or private contractors or whatever, after the recovery of the Lifehold core. So, the only 2 Skells that are old enough to have been always guiding people and powerful enough and influential enough are that tandem Ares and the Vita. And I kind of doubt that Elma would describe the Vita as guiding people in a positive connotation. Since Elma is probably referring to the tandem Ares she shared with the Black Knight, and we don't know in what way she says we. Is she referring to all of Blade, all of humanity? She could also just be referring to her and the Black Knight, where she and him escaped together with that Skell, and the Skell somehow guided them to Earth. And after he was lost, he was able to do things on his own that the Skell brought him towards. And then the Skell now is somehow guiding the characters to this new area where they're needed to do something, maybe to stop the ghosts or resolve some new problem. As for this new area, there are a few interesting things to talk about here. The first is that the only characters we see here are Elma, Lynn, Cross, and Tatsu, so most likely, like a lot of other story chapters, Chapter 13, or whatever chapter takes us to this new area, is only going to require those characters. Maybe we will canonically journey around here with some other party members, like some of the rest of the 7 that we saw before with the Black Knight unmasking. Who really knows? Obviously, we don't see Skells anywhere in this footage, but your Skell never shows up in cutscenes really anyway, so that makes sense too. I have a crack theory about where this new area is located. My original idea for whatever the new area would be is just some new continent on Mira, disconnected from the 5 we go through in the main game because there's some ocean in between it, and it's where Tatsu's father was off exploring. He will return at some point after Chapter 12, and that will lead Blade to wanting to explore there instead. I no longer think this is true, because it seems like the Black Knight showing up and his Ares doing some sort of guiding thing is going to be what leads humanity to this new region. And I actually think that this is located inside the giant chasm in Oblivia. First off, that was always a very striking and mysterious area in the original game, and is also home to Heartmut the Calamity, one of the super bosses of the game, a level 91, which is one of the only 3 millipod enemies in the entire game. So, a mysterious area with giant powerful wildlife coming out of it that greatly exceeds the original level cap, basically needs to be fought in Skells because it's flying over a chasm, and I don't know, you're getting a bigger level cap, which would allow you to even more easily take on powerful enemies like that, like maybe kin of that one that lies deeper in the chasm. That just kind of makes sense too. Additionally, all of the rock formations around here are floating islands, which do somewhat resemble some concept art from the original game, and also obviously a lot of reused ideas from Xenoblade 3 in here too, but they do look like more saturated, higher contrast Oblivia formations than anything else. That was my first thought when I saw it. It looks like a palette-swapped remixed Oblivia more so than a unique new area, so that is kind of interesting. One thing I am very excited for is this area only being accessible post-story, which means you are guaranteed to have the flight module from the start of you exploring here, and that is not true anywhere else in the game, so all the other regions were designed kind of with 3 layers of exploration. On foot, in a Skell that can't fly, and then with flight. And honestly, flight got the short end of the stick because you don't have it for most of the story, and you can explore most of the world without it, which means most of what it does is just trivialize other pieces of exploration you could have done without the flight module. So, a region designed from the ground up, with you being able to fly, is very, very interesting. I am looking forward to Tears of the Kingdom But Good, featuring giant robots and Elma from the Xenoblade Chronicles series. I want to focus on this shot here of the big structure surrounded by the floating islands, because there is some sort of energy field surrounding this new area. Now, it might only be around this big central structure, and the entire rest of the new area is larger. We can't really tell the full scope of this just from the few shots we get in the trailer, but there is this green energy field surrounding at least some of the floating islands. And if that's some sort of cloaking thing, hiding them from view from the top of the Oblivia Chasm, despite light still being able to reach them, obviously, that also makes sense, and is a funny parallel to the Manon ship going in there and cloaking as well. Also, speaking of the Manon ship, it literally appears to be there in the lower right-hand corner of this shot, suggesting that maybe riding it from NLA is how we get to this new area, and guess what the only ship that's been confirmed to have been down in the Oblivia Chasm is in the first place? Bazinga. Whatever this field is, it seems to be generated from this big floating thing in the middle, and yeah, it looks like Alchemoth stuff, and a lot of this area does resemble the Keves Castle region from Xenoblade 3. I am more inclined to believe it's Convergent Evolution and not a specific reference, and that's because the big structure here also resembles something called the Rose Garden. And that, if you didn't know, is another unused element from the secret portion of the Xenoblade X art book. This time, it's a mysterious spaceship orbiting Mira that also bears a lot of similarities to Origin. So that and the whole garden motif made me think that it did originally work somewhat similar to how Origin did in Ionios to Mira, where Mira was some sort of simulation or modeled thing keeping track of people, and the Rose Garden was the thing holding humanity's souls and allowing them to still live in the Mimeosomes even after the Lifehold was destroyed. But that might have been repurposed because that literally is just Origin from Xenoblade 3, and they like doing remixes on their own ideas. They don't usually do the exact same thing twice in a row. But yeah, this looks like some kind of core device powering things in this region, and I have reason to believe that it is inside Mira somehow, because we also can't see the bottom here. So it would make sense to be either in a bottomless chasm or somewhere up really high in the sky. Maybe they changed it to a floating continent from a spaceship in the atmosphere because they decided to change exactly how far away from Mira you could get before it pulls you back in. The Nintendo JP article does refer to this area as a, quote, floating continent, unquote. And while this is definitely the same format as the Japanese names of the other continents, I can't tell if it's saying this is a floating continent or this is the floating continent. So I'm not sure if that is the proper Japanese name of this region yet. Next, I think we should talk about the music, as this is the only portion of the trailer that plays a new song. Previously, it was just Mono X and Uncontrollable, but the new story scenes play one brand new track. And this is a little contentious, but it does not seem like Hiroyuki Sawano is returning. I understand why, it's not a complete project, and he is very, very expensive now compared to how he was in 2015. This was something I did kind of anticipate happening, but the fact that he isn't back here has me very, very concerned for what they're going to do with Yuki Kajiura's music in the upcoming Xenosaga remasters that are definitely still going to happen. Anyway, though, this very, very much sounds like someone who has done field themes for the numbered Xenoblade games trying to replicate Sawano's style, using instrumentation and flourishes that are similar to him, but still the main melody of this track is a boisterous, triumphant major key string line, so it really does just sound like someone who has experience on regular Xenoblade game themes trying to do a spin on an X one. I don't know which composer who has worked on the mainline series this is, but who knows? I'm going to assume that any new songs will be handled by some combination of Ace, Kenji Hiramatsu, Manami Kiyota, Yasunori Mitsuda, and Mariam Abu Nasser, who were the composers for Xenoblade 3. I can't really talk about how gameplay might be different because, as far as I can tell, this is just an addition to the existing story. Like, there will be Chapter 13 and probably like 14 and 15 as well, at the very least, covering all this new content. So it's not really worth speculating about what kind of gameplay changes might be there. I think it is just going to be an extension of the existing gameplay. Maybe there will be a story reason for the level cap increase when we enter this new area and that kind of thing happens. But beyond that, it's just going to be more of the same peak Xenoblade X stuff that we already got. And there's going to be like higher tiers of gear, probably another tier for each Skell frame, all that kind of thing. We also only see the new area in cutscenes, so we don't see any of the enemies here. But I'm sure that it's going to be a lot of more recolors and alternate forms of existing enemy models, with only a few new ones. Like, it seems like the main antagonist of this storyline is going to be the ghosts. There's probably going to be some new ghosts designs, but even then, there are a bunch of them that only appeared in the opening cutscene that we never actually get to fight in gameplay, so those would also be unique enemies even if their models already existed. Oh, also, there are exactly 2 shots in the trailer of fighting the ghosts. One of them is them very close to the big chasm in Oblivia, and the other is in the ocean, and as far as I can tell, the Black Knight unmasking scene takes place in Primordia near the entrance to Oblivia, so some of these new story cutscenes are already next to the chasm, which lends even more theory to the fact that, yeah, we're going down there. And then, finally, what is my speculation for what all of this means? I've seen some discussion about this new area being a core of Mira or something like that, and I am inclined to believe that. This is what appears to be the canon version of the Rose Garden, and the Rose Garden was something overseeing Mira in what is implied to be a cultivatory way. Then there's the fact that Mira seems to be a combination of a bunch of different destroyed planets, as Kaldros was likened to Old Roth, or the homeland of the Rothians, in the art book as well, and if something is made that way, it makes sense for there to be something holding it together. There's also the idea that this is someplace important that the Ares led people to. And I think there's a very good chance we'll learn not only more about Elma, not only more about the Black Knight, not only the secret of how Lao is alive again and how the Black Knight survived, but also about the Ares and what it does. And if there's going to be any connection to other games in the Xeno series, it will be through where the Ares came from and its history. Will we learn about the original Samarians and why they look like humans? Maybe. That is the only other really big connection to the rest of the series that I think is true, and that is that the Samarians come from Klaus's universe. Is that kind of thing, and universe travel using the conduit, and Ouroboros and Origin doing somewhat similar things to what Mira might actually be, some kind of connection? Maybe, but I still think that X Definitive Edition is going to be them pouring in as many unused ideas that did not get repurposed for 3 as possible. And then, if we get another X game, and I 100% believe X2 is happening at some point, maybe not before Xenoblade 4, but definitely eventually, probably within the next decade, then they will elaborate on connections to things. I don't want the connections to be here in XDE. I want them to just finish the story, resolve the cliffhangers, answer some of our questions, and then connect things later on if that's what they truly want to do. The thing is, will this involve escaping from Mira or just defeating the ghosts? I am not sure if humanity will leave Mira at the end of XDE. Now, repairing the white whale and having it escape with whatever friendly xenoforms they wanted to take with them, and going on to new planets to try and form a new home on something that isn't as wacky as Mira, would make sense for an X2, but if they want an X2 with a new location, they can just have another Ark ship crash on a different part of Mira and then eventually link up with NLA. I think that we are going to resolve something with Mira, but humanity will decide to stay living there at the end of the expansion. Will we get rid of the inability to escape Mira, and then Professor B can time travel out, and other characters who want to leave will be able to escape? Maybe. Will we be resolving the Mimiosome issue and get everyone in flesh and blood bodies back? Maybe. I think that if this new area is some sort of special region and that green light is some sort of energy field holding the planet together, we will learn how it works. But I think that we will also learn how to use it for the benefit of everyone who's stuck there, and even if we can't allow people to leave, everyone will want to stay by the end of this. Unless, of course, it does reveal that Earth is back, or maybe even they will find a way to leave this universe and go to another one. Like, Mira might be a pocket dimension of some sort and not a physical planet in the outside of the Xenoblade X universe. So, because pocket dimensions aren't in the original universe, maybe they can also use Mira's wackiness to travel to a different one, say one where Earth exists. If you want the light at the end of Future Redeemed to be the white whale somehow, that's probably another way to make it happen. Once again, I don't want to speculate anymore because anything else I can say would not be based on anything we can actually see in the trailer and kind of just fan-fictioning my own idea for what I want the rest of the plot to be. We're almost certainly going to get at least one more trailer, and depending on how close to release that is, I will be covering it in this much depth as well, and I'm sure we'll be able to glean a lot more from that. I would like to stop talking now. This has been a very long video, and I need to start editing it too, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you watched the entire thing, unless you didn't want to see the spoiler stuff, in which case you're already not watching. But yeah, I'm not sure when the next video will be. I have a Future Redeemed video partially recorded, but I'm probably going to record another Xenoblade X video I had been planning, just to ride on the hype of this trailer, but who knows when that will be. I want to have at least something else out in January, but I'm going to need to rest a lot after finishing this one, so please be patient for me. Until next time, though, this is Luxon, signing off.